Get a word in it. Whoops. This meeting is being recorded. Okay. Got it. I was going to throw in a quick thing before we got formally started. Mikhail, I like your background today. And by the way, happy birthday. Okay, now let's officially get started. Happy Saturday-ish. Again, here we are on Zoom, and somebody mentioned we have fewer people than usual. It's two so far already. We have two more than we've had for the last few times. I guess it's because we have a very popular speaker today. So our topic, rules, conventions, guidelines. What are they? Well, I don't know. That's why we brought somebody in to talk about it. This gentleman has been was in the Canadian military, found himself in Germany, and got involved in square dancing and square dance calling. Did you start square dancing there also, or just the calling?
I did square dancing in high school, but I started formal square dancing in Germany.
So back in 1981, came back to Canada and continued calling. Started mentoring callers, coaching callers, teaching newer callers. He calls basic through A1. He's also been teaching and mentoring callers in Canada, US, and Australia since 1995. Moved to Australia in 2005, continues calling and training there. Somewhat competing with us, but I like to think of it as supplementing us to a great way. He does Zoom sessions like this also, calls them ASH, which is a clever acronym. It stands for Australia Sensible Time. We've got several Australians with us today, and it's totally unsensible for them to be up in the middle of the night for this, but I'm glad we're here for both of those. His sessions are Saturday mornings in Australia, which is Sunday afternoons here in the U.S. or evening.
Other way around now. Sunday morning for us, Saturday afternoon.
Sunday morning here.
Yeah.
Can't read
early Sunday morning.
Well, yeah, all right. Anyway, he's a frequent attendee at our Saturday Zoom sessions here. So coming to you from the future, it's Sunday there, it's only Saturday here. Let's welcome Mel Wilkerson.
Thanks, Don. If you stick around long enough, I'll give you tomorrow's lottery ticket numbers because they're today's for us. I did have one question there, Chris. You call up to challenge, is that correct? Were you just adjusting your camera, or was that a thumbs down when you said I only call up to A1? When your hand went up to the screen, that's all I saw was this.
But who, me?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just fiddling with the camera.
Actually, Chris and Clark called down to mainstream.
Right.
Well, they started up in the higher levels.
Thank you very much for having me. There's only one clarification I'd like to make in Don's introduction. That's when he called me a gentleman. It's something I've never really been accused of being too often, but I thank you for the kind words. One of the reasons for this session, and it's come up in these sessions and a few of the other ones that I've attended across, is a common occurrence happens when things like the passing rule, the same position rule, but more commonly is the ocean wave rule and the facing couples rule, getting people to explain them and getting people to understand them. We all generally know the rules, guidelines, and definitions generically. So, but what are they? How do they mean? Have we even read the guidelines and conditions? So that's what this session is about. It's not going to be a, I'm not going to go through the basic mainstream and advanced programs and plus programs to actually talk about the definitions. What we're going to do is just look at the definitions in generic terms and then see if we can field any questions, or not the definitions, I should say, the rules and the guidelines. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. And hopefully, yeah. Now I've got the screen on share, so I can't really see anybody. So if you do have any questions or comments along the way, by all means, please pipe in. It's more of a presentation that I'm going to be going through. Is that screen up okay?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, so when we talk about definitions and guidelines, the first thing is, of course, the definition. And the definitions are different than the definition of the call. The definition of each call is included in that lofty book or those lofty documents called the definitions. And the program's definitions in itself is a document. And the beginning of that document usually contains all the important information of how to apply the individual movement definitions that are within each level or each program document. I got to stop saying level. There are parts of reading the definition that this presentation, and it's really those little things at the beginning and the ancillary stuff external to the actual proper definitions of each movement that I'm going to be talking about. It's not about reading the definitions. It's about getting a better understanding of the rules, the conventions, the guidelines that are often very misunderstood, or in some cases not even understood at all, that both support and apply to the definitions that we as callers so desperately cling to. Many of these definitions are written with qualifiers or with level restrictions, or they're mentioned in the appendices. They talk about the approach that you want to take. They talk about the rules, examples of what is standard, what's proper, what's improper, how to name dancers. And there's so much more in there that is often overlooked that apply in some cases to every definition, and in other cases only to one or two. Unfortunately, those important parts, because they're overlooked either intentionally or otherwise by many callers, creates a lot of issues, and they also create a lot of controversy and discussion. You know, and reasons vary for. I was talking with Dan earlier. Says, well, this is how I was taught it, so I never really went back and read it. I read the definition itself of the movement. That's really what matters. The rest of the stuff is administrative, and it's just too cumbersome to go through. Or in some cases, I'm just too lazy to go back and read the basic rules because I only call it plus and higher. There's some people that say, oh, I don't need to know all that. I'll put it in simple terms. The definitions explain it anyway, and I'll give them the definitions. And there's, you know, any one of a million other reasons not to do it. Unfortunately, that's not the way square dance calling works. We all know that. If you do that, you're not only cheating yourself, but you're cheating the dancers of having the best experience they can have by not telling them the rules, not telling them the guidelines, or not applying the rules and guidelines of how we play this game that we call square dancing. And there's an awful lot of information in the first 15 pages. Well, it's actually the first 10 pages because the first 5 are lists and jargon about what the book is about, but it's also important stuff. What I'm going to concentrate on here is the stuff that starts about page 8, which is where we get into the rules and the convention, as well as some other information that's provided from the choreographic guidelines. And I've given Dan a copy of the current versions of the definitions, the guidelines, and a few other things, because although they are on the Color Lab website, it's still a bit cumbersome to try and find a few of these things in the knowledge base. So when we start page 8 to 10, now there's a lot of information on these slides, and I'm just skimming these very quickly because I'm going to go into these in quite a bit of detail. But there's 3 pages that talk about the 6 rules and the conventions, and they're very important because they're what this presentation is mainly going to focus on. That's not why they're important. They are important, and that's why I'm going to focus on them in this presentation, because they apply to all levels of dancing. And some of these rules are intuitive. Others can be confusing if you don't understand them. Most people understand them and apply them, but they don't actually know why they work or why it is the way it is. The first is the passing rule. Simply that says how to pass another dancer safely without hitting them. The second one is the same position rule. That tells you what you do if you're going to occupy the same place, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's the facing couple rule. It basically says treat facing couples, treat ocean waves as facing couples even when they're not. And then there's the ocean wave rule, which is just the opposite, which says treat ocean waves as facing couples even when you're not. And that applies sometimes and not all the time. And then of course there's the squared convention set, which, you know, whoever goes in from a static square, do they stay in or do they come back out, and what calls that applies to. And finally, the circle rule. And that's basically a circle works as a square when you use certain calls. Those in itself seem very, very simple. And that section basically contains and says the convention and rules are there for the commonality and understanding of the definitions that are contained in the document. And callers that make choreography or write choreography or use choreography or in some cases develop new movements should read these rules and use good judgment if they're going to do something that conflicts with those 6 basic rules and conventions. Now, what all that extra stuff applies to is basically every single program in square dancing. It's included in basic, it's pared down a little bit in mainstream. At plus, they tried to simplify all the preliminaries in the plus program by giving a shortened version to reinforce the rules, because basic and mainstream are part of the plus program and all the rules apply. And so they shortened it rather than just say, and rather now they just say, see basic and mainstream definitions for rules and guidelines. What that says is, it said they're important, so here's a short refresher, and they gave you a truncated version of it. At the advanced program, we get back to a reinforcement of the basic rules and a few additions that are applicable at higher program levels. Okay, and I guess that's there because it's so very important that after Dancing Plus, to remind dancers that you've got to be able to dance good basic and mainstream if you want to be able to dance advanced level dancing properly. The appendices there add extra terms that are not there because if you don't know them by now, chances are you shouldn't be dancing that level anyway. So they just got rid of all the appendices and all that ancillary stuff because they say, if you don't know this stuff by now, you shouldn't be here. Unfortunately, the reality is if it's not there, a lot of people, well, it's not in the definitions or it's not in that program, doesn't apply here. That's unfortunate. Challenge starts with a section, and I like what they did in the challenge, even though I don't call it. It's the first time that Color Lab in any of these definitions documents past basic says they're there to refer, the definitions are there to refer disputes in interpretation as to what a call means. It says before you use the definitions, you should be familiar with the Color Lab basic mainstream definitions, the Color Lab plus definitions, the Color Lab advanced definitions, the standard formation, and where possible, have used all those calls and formations that are defined in these documents. So, and then they say that's what allowed them to make the definitions, the actual physical description of the movements of what you're supposed to do, a lot shorter and a lot clearer, because they say, these are the rules, these are the conventions, these apply to this movement, here it is, don't argue with it. And it's a very technical aspect, so you've got to know all those technicalities. So most callers know and agree that there's 5 basic rules and 1 listed convention that apply to all square dancing, regardless of the program on which it's being called. However, there are a few other conventions, which I may touch on, that are taken as rules. Now, we were discussing one of them, which was in Recycle, which I'll mention a little bit later. And the document for that is the Color Lab Choreographic Guidelines. And I provided a copy of the last updated version of that to Dan. It's on his website and it's available after the session, or you can get it from the Color Lab website. This topic, however, is rarely taught. These guidelines, I mean, in the rules and definitions. It's rarely mentioned. It's rarely even hinted at collar schools or in the training curriculum. It's assumed that most callers know and understand the definitions. And it's a really bad assumption, which is why I really love that little cartoon. You know, you assumed. When you assume, you know what happens. And the guy says, I don't. Yet you're confidently asserting that I do. You're making that, oh, check and mate. That's the reality. I didn't want to say what everybody else knows what assume means. Okay, so does anybody want to give me an idea of what they think a convention is, a simple terms? Anybody?
I'll go with,
I would have thought a practice.
A practice?
A practice that's usually followed.
Yeah, I can accept that. In terms of square dancing, it refers to the way something's done. What's a rule?
a formalized practice.
Yep.
Something that has to be done.
So with conventions, in terms of square dancing, it refers to the way in something is usually done. We always do it this way, so this is the way it's done. That's a convention. Everybody does it the same way. Conventions played a lot into that abhorrent term Color Lab recognizes regional differences, which is a great idea. Unfortunately, it's become a get out for a lot of callers to do things differently. A rule is very explicit, and it refers to the method or the principle which governs the conduct or process of a specific action applicable to certain things that happen on the dance floor with the dancers. And if they meet those criteria, then that rule applies. And they're very, very clear. And they're like that for a very specific reason. That'll become very obvious later. Okay, so if a convention is the normal way of doing things followed by enough dancers, it may eventually evolve into a rule. Okay, and it may even become, or may even lead to a revised definition. And this is why I said I would mention recycle later, because it is one of the classic examples of a convention becoming a rule, becoming a defined. There's a risk of when something is done some way for so long, from lots of dancers, it becomes a convention and then it can become a rule. One of the classic examples is recycle being taught as girls you turn back, wheel and deal is an example. Okay, that never became a rule, that never became a definition. But one thing did fall out of that, which is a convention that came from bad teaching and bad flow of that movement. Because if you do a fold, can you sweep a quarter more after a fold or a cross fold? No. But can you recycle and sweep a quarter more? Yes. That's one of those conventions that became proper because that's the way it was always done. So it's allowed. So when something like this happens, and it does happen, a new rule is created, or a new rule is used to create choreography, which sometimes conflicts with the convention or the definition that led to that rule. And when that happens, we end up in chaos arguments, and we've had lots of discussions about can you recycle and sweep a quarter more, and the dancers and the callers just quitting and going off in their own direction and doing their own thing and making their own interpretations about what can and cannot be done, which leads to confusion, especially when you go to dance with another caller. The importance of the conventions and the 5 rules is simply, without them in place, callers create new choreography or use choreography in accordance with their own interpretation of the definition. A simple thing like a misplaced comma can really change the meaning of a message. As I've got there, let's eat grandpa or let's eat grandpa. You know, 2 completely different definitions, same words, but 1 comma makes a difference. Imagine what that's like when you got things like, well, if you turn adjacent with the adjacent dancer 270 degrees and then blah, 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 blah. Wow, that can be interpreted a lot of ways, especially if there's rules that are applicable to it. As a warning, callers should always exercise good caution and good judgment in creating choreography and rules when they do something and in the way that they write their material. And if you want to do something different, then clarify very specifically in the definition of your new movement. Dawn, I think you probably went through this more than most of us here. I think there's a couple others here that have written movements, but you've written a lot of movements and you had to actually consider these rules and these definitions in the application of the movement. And I like the movement Ferris wheel, for instance, because how you wrote that is not the way it's being used. It's evolved into what it is now. Is that correct?
Pretty much so, yeah.
Yes.
Close. The bigger thing I had to fight for to make it like what I wrote was ping pong circulate. There were a lot of abortions, and we can hit that in the conversation later.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start looking at the rules. One of the first ones that's listed is the passing rule. So can anybody give me just a quick synopsis? One of the newer callers, if we can, but anybody just throw it out there. I can't see your screen, so don't raise your hand up. So if you do pipe in. Dan's watching the chat if there's anything there.
Okay, Helen here. When you pass with right hand, with right shoulders, that's the general way you explain it.
Yep, and I like that. The passing rule says if the definition of a call has 2 dancers on the same path, that they're going to bump noses with each other, it requires them to walk past each other. They should pass right shoulders unless otherwise specified, and then continue on their path. It also goes and says the mirror image of this call has dancers passing left shoulders and continue. That would be the same as a left double pass through. Now, here's a question for you. Can I do heads past the ocean, centers pass through?
It's
All right.
From a static square, heads past the ocean, centers pass through.
I think it should be centers extend, shouldn't it?
That's not what it should be. Is can I do that? And the answer is yes, because the rules apply and it allows us to pass right shoulders. Now-
I question what you're saying there, Mel, because
No, it worked with me on this.
the heads are active, in which case the centers of that center wave could pass through.
I understand that. This is what I'm
So,
getting at.
so straight away we've got an interpretation of just
That's right. And this is what I'm getting to. The rule itself says dancers on. Now, if I say centers, active dancers, I'm talking centers. Or am I saying the center of the wave? Because if I say the center of the wave, no, I can't, because they have to pass which shoulder? Left shoulders. They cannot do a pass through on that. If I say center or heads Dixie style to an ocean wave, I cannot call pass through. I would have to say left pass through. That's clearly defined in the definition. But as Alan was saying, when you add ambiguity without understanding the whys, this is what can happen. If I say centers pass through, those two center dancers, oh, are they the centers of the way? That's left shoulders. They cannot pass through by the rules. But we never explain the why as to why that's improper. And as Helen said, yeah, a step through or extend would be a much better call. The same position rule. Somebody want to give me a crack at that one?
Well, if nobody else will pop in, I'll suggest that it says that if dancers would occupy the same position at the end of a movement, they end up in a right-handed wave.
Okay, there's an important part of that that's missing.
Okay.
Providing they're facing the opposite direction.
That's the one. Absolutely correct. So if two dancers are required to occupy the same position at the end of a call and they're facing in opposite directions, they form a right-hand mini wave. And that's a right-hand mini wave. Now, if I call extend from a left-hand ocean wave, I extend to a left-hand wave, that violates the rule. No, it doesn't violate the rule because that is clarified in the definition. And this is why the two have to work synonymously. So there are clarifications on. There's another important part on this. If an adjustment is necessary, since they're now two dancers side by side in a formation, the adjustment is always sideways towards the outside of the group in which they were working. Now, it also says callers should never use a call that has two dancers who are facing the same direction or at right angles, such as a T-bone, to occupy the same position. And that's just common sense. Now, what's important with these rules is sometimes multiple rules work together at the same time. An example for this is, and this is not something I would recommend calling, but if I take lines facing out and I call circulate once and a half, what formation do I end up in?
Tidal wave.
Tidal wave, correct. So let's just have a quick look at that. You can see terminations there?
Yes.
So they're all passing right shoulders and they end up in the tidal wave as an individuals. Now, this is one that's come up in discussion a lot. If I call veer to the left from here, as facing couples, if they did it, because it's a two couple movement, the sides should end up face to face. Why don't they?
because of square breathing.
Each group does it in their own little group of four, because veer left is a 4-dancer call, and then the two groups are put adjacent to each other at the end.
Okay. But is there any rule that covers that?
Is something that says each call is defined from the smallest place possible, and
No,
there may be multiple instances of
the
it.
rule that actually covers that is because we've defined this as a couple's call. It's the same position rule. And that same position rule says if an adjustment is necessary, since the two dancers are now side by side, in a veer where you have couples moving, such as a veer to the left or a couples movement, if couples are required to occupy the same spot, the adjustment is sideways towards the outside of the group in which they were working. That same rule applies here. So if I call veer to the left, that's what we get. And everybody is absolutely correct. It's just a matter of explaining why does that work?
I question, but that the outsides have no idea that they've got to move out. You're saying the adjustment, yeah, sure, the adjustment has to be towards the outside, but the people going to the outside don't see they have any need for adjusting.
Exactly. And why they don't see it is because that has never really been clarified to them. It's just taken for granted that you scrunch together in the center. And you really don't have to. Ideally, what would happen on a veer to the left from facing lines would be the center dancers, and that in the case of that last one, they would go straight ahead, and the dancers that's going to the left would actually veer way over to the outside so that you get that nice little tidal wave that's not scrunched together. That's just the reality of the rules and how it's explained. Now, there was a big discussion that went on with this at Challenge, from challenge callers and whatnot. I fully admit I do not call challenge, but I believe this rule even applies at challenge. It does not end up in that Z with the two center dancers facing. Is that correct? Any challenge callers out there?
But the rules don't change at challenge.
Good, good. It was a discussion that was had, and they said, well, that doesn't work that same way. We'd end up in this formation. And I don't think so, but I wasn't sure. I wanted to ask that to make sure that it was clear.
A lot of times I hear people in different circumstances say the following phrase, oh, maybe you can do that at challenge, or maybe that works at challenge. But the rules are consistent through, you know, all the programs or levels or whatever you want to call it.
That's what I was taking to believe, but as I said, I don't call that. I wanted to clarify that. Okay, the next rule is the facing couple rule. Somebody want to give me a crack at that one? This is one of the ones that always creates the controversy. Anybody?
The main thing about it is that half the people, half the time, callers can never remember the name of the rule. There's the ocean wave rule and the facing couples rule. which one's which again?
You're absolutely correct. So I'm just going to go through that. The facing couple rule simplified says, I'm not in a wave, but pretend I am rule. Okay. And now there's a few specific calls that are defined to start from an ocean wave, which are also proper from facing couples, swing through, spin the top, those kinds of things. If the dancers first step to a momentary right-hand ocean wave, they complete the call. That's essentially it. If the caller directs a left-hand call, for instance, left swing through, the dancers first step to a left-hand ocean wave and complete the call. The rule, excuse me. Oops, what happened there? Okay. If the facing couple rule is applied, or if it's applicable, the call's definitions in the basic and mainstream document will have a comment to that effect. If there's no such comment, and this is the important part, if there's no such comment, do not use the facing couples rule. It's that simple. It will tell you if the facing couple rule applies. When the facing couple, while the rule is called the facing couple rule, it's generalized to include facing dancers stepping to a right-hand mini wave and facing lines stepping to a right-hand tidal wave, that kind of stuff. But it's also used, sorry, I was ahead of slide. It's also used in these mixed mini wave type formations where facing dancers can do the movements, but the startup formation is a bit unusual. So for instance, in that little box on the left, can I call a spin the top from there? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Would you call a spin the top from there?
No.
No.
Well, at some dances where you're playing around specifically with that kind of thing, where, you know, I guess people would call that a DBD dance or whatever, however you label it, but a workshop-y kind of.
You're going to see it. Absolutely. If that is the purpose and you're reinforcing that, absolutely. And this is where we get some really, really interesting choreography with callers that use computers and things to write their choreography, because the thing that's not, there is no rule called caller judgment. That's called common sense. And there's no rule to govern common sense. unfortunately. There's a few other things in there. But yeah, you can call a swing through from here. You can call a spin the top from here, all those other kinds of things. I would not advise it, okay? And simply the timing, there's a note on timing. If you have the facing couple rule, it doesn't change the timing of a call. But that also conflicts with another rule, which we'll get into a little bit later, depending on the starting formation. And you have to understand these kinds of things. Okay, the next one is the ocean wave rule. I put this slide up, and this is basically, I'm not in facing couples, but pretend I am rule. And what it basically says is some calls are defined to start from facing couples that are also starting in right-hand ocean waves. For example, a right and left through, or a square through from a right-hand ocean wave. In these cases, the dancers have already stepped forward, the facing dancer is there, they complete the remaining action of the directed call. This was really easy to do when ocean waves had your hands forward, slightly down below the shoulders, palms crossed. Very, very easy to do. Now that ocean waves are up here, they're pigeon winged or down with hands like penguin flappers, it becomes a little more awkward. And this is where sometimes it gets confusing, especially when dancers are rushed up to those levels, or they start at those levels because of nuances of their general location or for whatever reason. As a general guide, if the movement you're calling puts transitioning through a mini wave or a left-hand wave as part of the call, the ocean wave rule applies. That means that you can do a facing couple movement from the ocean wave. Now, sometimes this rule applies to specific levels, and that's clarified. And this is where we have a big problem because rules do change, or sorry, the rules don't change, but the qualification of the application of that rule does change. And the classic example is the movement past the ocean. Past the ocean is a facing couple call. You cannot call past the ocean from an ocean wave at basic or mainstream, but the definition comment says it may be applied at other programs. My personal opinion is you'd be a jerk if you did that, but that's just a personal opinion. It is allowable, just same as right and left through is allowed from half sashayed couples at plus and above. I think it's wrong, but that's just my opinion. It can be applied, but if you're going to do this, make sure your dancers are aware of what you're doing, and I wouldn't call that at an open dance. But that's just my opinion. So, sorry, go ahead, Alan.
So past the ocean from an ocean wave is the same as doing locket.
Yep, at an advanced level.
At an advanced level. So it's sort of, so you can slide through, and then if the next call then uses the other rule.
Yes, and this is where it gets confusing, but where the problem is because this can be done at a higher level, and it's done, and some callers doing that. When that caller goes down to a basic or a mainstream, oh well, that can be done there. So it's I don't know why they don't understand that. We had a little bit of that discussion earlier with the movement recycle and how it was taught and how I was taught and how it was explained and so on, and it didn't work with my group that didn't dance those higher levels. So here's some examples of where it can be used. So a right and left through from standard waves, the ocean wave rule. Okay, from a trade by, or sorry, a trade by from a 3/4 tag formation. Yeah, perfectly legal. A swing, perfectly legal. Right and left grand, perfectly legal. Double pass through from a 1/4 tag, perfectly. Square through from an ocean wave, all these other kinds of things. Where it cannot be used, and this is where the controversy usually comes, with one simple movement, circulates. No call in the circulate can be used with the ocean wave rule. And that's why it gets confused, because can you call a circulate from an ocean wave? Absolutely. For example, from a 1/4 tag or 3/4 tag, circulates from a wave are on a path to the next position, past the ocean at basic and mainstream, touch a 1/4. Okay, that's where they cannot be applied, that ocean wave rule. Okay, so while the rule is called the ocean wave rule, it's generalized to include mini waves facing dancers, tidal waves facing lines, and things like that. Examples include pass through, slide through, box net, double pass through from right hand waves, 1/4 tags, pass to the center, all those other kinds of things. For the ocean wave rule to apply, the initial dance action has to have a call, must start with a box the net, a pass through, or a right pull by. If the call cannot be defined like that and has a different action, don't use it. It's that simple. If it starts with one of those 3 types of actions, you can apply it. And those are the 3 to remember.
One of the things about rules and definitions when you're teaching is the question of how much we really demand of the dancers to know definitions. And so when I'm teaching, regular level, beginner classes and stuff, I'll tell them that there are restrictions on the things, but for the facing couples rule, I tell them, well, this doesn't work for all calls, but fortunately, you don't have to know which ones that is. That's the caller's job. And for the other one, and for the ocean wave rule, just do what your heart tells you.
And that was one of the clarifications and the key messages from this is you don't expect your dancers to know all the rules and definitions. They will pick these up as they go along. But as a caller, you are required to know, and you are required to apply them consistently for the dancers. Otherwise, you're robbing them of an experience, or you're creating conditions where they have bad experiences. And you're absolutely correct. The people that the rules, the definitions, and the guidelines are important to is the caller. You have to know them, and you have to be able to apply them consistently and properly. Excellent comment, Chris. What we're going to look at? Oh, yes. Okay, so we talk about circulates, and this is the one that has always created the arguments. The call circulate is defined from 8-chain through and from ocean waves separately. It would be improper to call it a circulate from ocean waves and expect the dancers to do a step through. For instance, if I'm in an 8-chain 4 position and I call circulate, the dancers do a pass through. If I'm in an ocean wave, which is still an 8-chain 4 position, I can call 8-chain through from an ocean wave, but I cannot call a circulate because there's a defined path, and that's defined in the definition. Okay? It would be wrong to expect the dancers to do a step through based on the ocean wave rule, because that would naturally apply to the definition of circulate from ocean waves. The two mini waves, the mixed mini waves and facing dancer start formations, while unusual, it's also proper. You could either call a swing through or a grand swing through or a right and left through or anything from those. But then again, if you did, I'd just say you'd be a jerk if you tried to do that. And this is all part of the ocean wave rule. The adjustment that's part of the ocean wave rule that does not change, the adjustment that is part of the ocean wave rule does not change the effect of the call. It neither adds nor subtracts parts or changes the use of fractions. So if you've got, cast off 3/4, can't do it there. But if you've got, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a 3/4 through, maybe you could do it there. I don't know. If a dancer is in a mini wave, that's how you treat it. You treat them as if the dancers are in a mini wave. For example, a right hand mini wave do-si-do ends up in facing dancers, not in right hand mini waves. So if I called a do-si-do from here, I'd end up with 2 facing couples. That's how these rules apply. The ocean wave rule also applies to calls that normally start from facing couples when the dancers are in left-hand ocean waves. In these calls, the caller must direct it as a left-hand call. So if I called left square through from here, I couldn't, because the 2 dancers are in a right-hand mini wave. So but they were in a left-hand mini wave, I could call left square through, but I'd have to clarify it with the left. Extensions like reverse wheel around when half the dancers are in a mini wave and the other half are facing couples, and the call is a 2-wave dancers call, such as box and that, slide through, pass through. The caller must, it says should, but I say must, make it clear who's going to do that call, either everyone or those facing, and all that other kind. And once again, in timing, the application of the ocean wave rule does not change the timing of a call. Okay, the next rule is the circle rule. Anybody want to take a crack at that one?
So if you name some people in a circle, you can kind of turn it into a squared set and have them.
Absolutely. From an in-facing circle, if the caller names 2 adjacent dancers, like head man in their corner up to the middle and back, you treat it like a static square. It's called what you've done is you've changed that circle into a squared set, regardless of where they're facing, and then you follow the squared set convention. Example from a squared set: join hands, circle left, heads up to the middle and back, heads square through, or heads half sachet, all circle left. 4 boys up to the middle and spin the top. As soon as you directed 4 adjacent dancers in that square opposite each other, you've now changed that circle into a square. The good news is those definitions apply to every level of square dancing. There may be qualifiers, as Chris was saying, it's an exception or an allowance. It's used with a higher program, pass the ocean, right and left through, for example. But generally, they are the same throughout. The squared set convention, I call this one the stay in or go at home rule. The stay in or go home rule. Okay. And basically what it says is calls that are defined from facing dancers or facing couples are also proper starting from a squared set. And there's only 3 parts to this rule. 1, the caller's got to identify who the pair of couples active is. Heads up to the middle and back. Okay, you've now defined them. If they're facing the same walls as the inactive dancers, they remain in the center. Example, heads square through, heads star through, heads touch a quarter, etc. If the call ends with the active dancers not facing the same walls, so if I say heads right and left through, or head ladies chain, etc., then the active dancers end back on the squared set spots, unless there's a clear reason for them to remain in the center. So dancers should return to the squared set spots for a head ladies chain, or a heads right and left through, or a heads pass through, or a heads square through 3. However, because of the ending handhold on the heads call, or on the call like heads box the net, because that handhold remains, the dancers stay in the center. Usually the exact ending position is obvious from the next call. For instance, heads right and left through, and then you say sides right and left through, the heads are going to back away. Okay, it doesn't really matter because the next call continues the dance action. It doesn't really matter when the next call continues the dance action, like heads pass through, separate around 1, because that's taking them away to the outside anyway. Or heads right and left through, same heads square through. They'll stay in the middle. Some callers who want active dancers to remain in the center will call things like heads move in, or heads go up to the middle and square through 3, or something like that. That keeps them in the center, and that deals with the timing issues.
I thought of an illegal example that never occurred to me until just this minute. But if somebody were to misunderstand the part about they stay on the head spots, heads flutter wheel, sweep a quarter, all 8 to the middle and back, which would be wrong.
Oh yeah, but here's one that would make a big difference. If I do a right and left through, and the dancers stay in the center, heads right and left through, heads separate. It's not wrong, but you'd be an idiot if you called it, unless they're used to staying on the outside. The reason that this is important is the timing consideration, because moving into the center adds 2 beats to the timing of a call. Okay, note that the time needed to move in and out of the middle is often blended in the final portion of the call, such as right and left through, the movement's done during the courtesy turn, or it's overlapped with the start of the next call, heads right and left through, sides right and left through. So the timing of the delivery is overlapping, and that pretty much tells the dancers where they need to go.
I had a friendly argument with a challenge caller for whom I was doing a dance in an overseas country a little while back. When I called heads right and left through, side couple star through, he claimed that we couldn't do a side star through because the heads were in the way. The heads should be in the middle after I've done a right and left through. And I said, no. If you do a right and left through, you should go across to the place where the dancers were that you're doing the right and left through with. If they're a long way away, then you end up a long way away.
And that's where styling conventions come in as well.
Yeah. Like if you call head couples star through and pass the ocean, side couples do a right and left through, don't the side couples end up way down the other end? They don't end up in the middle of the ocean wave, do they?
No. And that would be a blocked passage dance because you can't actively do it on the definition. So you can do that, but what you need to do is, of course, the clarifying prompt. And I've seen you do that. It says all heads past the ocean, sides all the way to the far end, do the right and left through, pull by and go all the way to the end to do the courtesy turn. You know, some kind of clarification like that that will fit in with the timing of the dance. And
Well,
that's, yep.
Can I just chime in and say, I think there's a call that would actually define the center rule you've got there. And that is if you call heads partner tag. Now, do you expect them to finish in the center, or do you expect them to finish outside of the side couples?
And that's where it goes in. The next call will usually define the ending position that the caller defines or the caller desires. If I did a partner tag from a static square, I would expect that in most cases and in most places, the head couples would face their partner, past their partner, and they would stay on the outside. And you would get something like heads, partner tag, and promenade around the outside.
Yeah, the controversial thing in that example is not, of course, they're still on the outside. The tricky question is, after they do the partner tag, are they connected to the sides in lines or not? Some people might not be sure.
And where I say that rule does not apply to that movement is because the rule says if active couples are required to go into the center to complete a call, and on a heads partner tag from a static square, they're not required to go into the center to complete a call.
Right, so they're still on the outside.
They're still on the outside.
I would claim that they're simply back to back in squared up position in squared set spots. That some people might get confused and think they should step forward a little further and hook on the end of the sides or something.
And these are absolutely fantastic discussions. But what this says to me is we as callers need to understand these rules and apply them consistently, because if we give the option to the dancers, if you give option A or option B and you tell them I want option A only, and you give them the choice, chances are over 50% of your hall is going to choose option B. That's just the way people are.
When I'm teaching my dancers about whether they should be on the outside or, like on the head ladies chain or whatever, what I tell, because of the weaselly part about if the next call requires it and so on, and because some callers may not be as clear, I always try to say things like you were saying earlier: heads come in the middle and do whatever.
Absolutely, and that's actually written in the rules and guidelines.
Right. So what I tell the dancers is to sort of be aware that not all callers are going to be as careful with that as they should be, and so they should hedge their bets. Here's some examples that you see all the time where clearly he still wants you on the outside, and here's somewhere he wants you inside. Then if you're not really sure, stay on the inside, and then if it's necessary, back out and get back out of the way, because it's easier to do the next call if you're already close to where you should do it, as opposed to having to come, oh, you meant for in the middle, and then come barging back in.
And the good news to all of these is the 5 rules in that one convention are fixed. They're sometimes called the 6 rules. They apply to all programs. They do not change with the programs, except where there's a specific application stated, and those are the qualifiers. Example, pass the ocean from waves, or right and left through at plus. Therefore, it's very important that callers read the definitions document holistically. That means the whole thing: the definitions document, the formation document, the choreographic guidelines, and the appendices, and etc. Because the definitions refer to the formation diagrams. The definitions refer to choreographic guidelines. The definitions refer to additional commands and terms such as left and right and reverse and stuff. And that's where you get that information from. So you've got to read all of them together. The definitions is actually 3 documents.
So I want to, before you go on, let me say a few things. Go back 2 slides. If that's easy, thank you. So the squared set convention at challenge, written or not, is you end in the middle. Heads pass through, the heads are back to back in the middle.
Yep.
Heads turn through, the heads are back to back in the middle.
Yep.
Heads right and left through, the heads are in the middle.
Yep.
The squared set convention at basic, mainstream, and probably plus is definitely all those cases I just mentioned. They would be outside on squared set spot.
They step out, and it's the defining action of the next call that usually does that.
So we have this problem that at mainstream, it works one way, and at challenge, it works another way.
That's correct.
And this is the one case where that kind of happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is one of the things that is set because that's a nuance or a qualification that is added to the plus. And at the moment, it's a convention because challenge dancers dance it that way. It's part of that convention, but I have not yet seen it written that is what it is as a written convention for challenge.
Right.
But it is.
It contravenes your rule, but
No, it doesn't contravene the rule. What it is, it's a qualifier to a rule that applies at a different program level, the same as right and left through at plus or higher, or past the ocean at plus or higher. It's a qualification. Right now, it's still a convention because that's the way they dance it, but it's not been formalized as a convention.
Well,
And
the definition of pass through, though, is that if you're doing a pass through, you walk forward and stand in the footprints of the person you're doing the pass through with.
That's correct. That's correct. And it's the next. It's
if you're
the
in a
next call that
set
defines.
And you have the head couples pass through, they should not end up in the center. So
Let's slow down.
Go ahead.
Where is pass through done from?
Sorry?
Where is pass through done from?
Okay.
Well, from a squared up set.
I understand that. Tell me about the call pass through. What's the smallest place you can do pass through from? How many dancers?
Okay, guys, I'm gonna intervene here in just a second. I've just written down pass through. Can we come back to that? Because I've got a few other things to go through. And I'd like to get through it, but I definitely want to come back to it because this is why this topic actually needs to have that discussion. So we're going to come back to pass through. I've got that written down here. Now, there are some of the rules that callers need to be aware of, and these can be found in the choreographic guidelines, and also which are also on the Caller Lab website. I've also sent them to Dan, so you've got the updated version. You can download it there if it's easier for you. But these choreographic guidelines also provide guidance to callers for teaching and calling, but additional recommended rules to help with the soft skills of calling. And we don't spend a lot of time on soft skills. And these are things such as flow, hands, smoothness, variety, timing, and all those other things that lead to success in calling. They're given that this you develop as experience, but there are guidelines and rules that govern that as well. And these are the 2-beat rule that relates to giving commands or command time. The amount of time required to give a command to be executed generally should be no more than 2 beats. Now, there are some exceptions to this, such as spin chain and exchange of the gears and things like that, but generally 2 beats. There's the smoothness rule, and this relates to body flow. In order to make the dance action as smooth as possible, callers must choose material which allows the dancers to smoothly move from one movement to the next. This means the dancers must be positioned at the completion of one call to move so the transition to the next call can be accomplished without the abrupt changes in direction. In attempting to meet this, the caller must consider both space for the move and the type of movement, whether it's straight or rotational. And there are variety exceptions to this, and the elements of variety, interests, and choreographic challenges are also very important. Sometimes a deliberate violation of the smoothness rule provides excitement and variety, which are of equal importance to the dancer. Unfortunately, this excuse is very often overused and why dancing is not always that smooth. The rules of smoothness are complex, and too few callers concern themselves with how to bring smoothness into the dancer action. Now, this also applies to what you were just talking about with the pass-through, and this relates to the smoothness rule of what it is, and that's why it has to be taken holistically. These are other rules that are in the guidelines. There's the rule of alternating hands or alternating shoulders. And there's a lot of arguments and exception on this one. It basically says the hand to be used must be available at the completion of the next, at the completion of the preceding action in order to feel smooth. Consider, for instance, the sequence star through, right and left through. If alternating hands were required for comfort, this sequence could not feel smooth for the men, and yet it does. Why? Well, the explanation is found in an interpretation of the rules, which goes as follows. The hand to be used must be available at the completion of the preceding action to feel smooth. If we consider that interpretation, when you look at the examples, star through, right and left through, which I really don't like, we see, however, at the end of star through, the man's right hand has come down. It's in the correct position and slightly forward, ready to go forward for the right and left through. The lady's hand is free. Therefore, the hand is considered available. If we switch that sequence, the sequence becomes very unsmooth. For instance, right and left through followed by a star through. The man's right hand is behind her back for the courtesy turn. It's not available in that sequence. So that would be considered unsmooth. And that'll create a lot of arguments and discussion. Another sequence which violates the same hand rule is from the 8-chain through formation, pass through trade by. In this sequence, dancers are coming into the center after the pass through and must again pass right shoulders for the trade by. This sequence is used extensively and is smooth. And the question is why? Because you've got that rule of alternating shoulders. This time the answer is in the body position of the dancers, because after the pass through, they're slightly offset and in a position to do the pass through using right shoulders very comfortably. So that's an alteration in the dance definition. It was considered when it was written with the trade by to follow a pass through, so it flows. And there's lots of examples like that. For instance, touch a quarter, scoot back, right hand to right hand, scoot back to a swing through, right hand to right hand. And that's because the actual action and the flow is a release and the hand movement is free on a release call. And they just get accepted that way. There's a thing
touch
called
a quarter, scoot back, swing through. You got 3 in a row.
Yep. And yet it's acceptable because those are all, you don't. You've got touch a quarter. There's no right hand action after that because it's a forward action. A scoot back, you've got no right hand connection, right hand to right hand, because it's a release action. And this is why it's not right hand to right hand, because that's the way the actual movement is defined. And that's the release theory that comes in that. So that's where right hand to right hand does become acceptable. The next one is the difficult choreography convention. And these are things that a lot of people have never even read these in the guidelines. And these deal with common ways in which difficulty is added to the square dance choreography using unfamiliar moves, unfamiliar formations and arrangements, unusual use of rules, or a combination of these elements. And the purpose behind that, deliberately using difficult or extended choreography should be to increase the pleasure of the dancers, not the pleasure of the callers or showing how clever they are. It's been discussed earlier and it's created something, and I've mentioned a couple times earlier in this presentation. The goal of each caller should be to provide smooth flowing, interesting dance material with just the right amount of difficulty. Any caller that can consistently provide this perfectly or even near perfect is a true artist. It can be done, but it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work to get there. Because of this special challenge in this type of dancing, success will bring a special pleasure to the dancers, and that will be the victory for the caller. Conversely, failure will not only be disastrous for the dancers, but it could be equally disastrous for the caller. The advice is to obtain full knowledge of the techniques and proceed slowly. Figure out what your dancers can and can't do, and that's caller judgment, which is not used. But that takes us to the next rule. The sequences used to implement this program can include complex choreography, unusual formations, unusual arrangements, surprise get-outs, modifications, modifications to the definitions, fractionalizing, those kinds of things, and unusual use of the rules and other factors which increase the difficulty of the choreography. So if you're going to do that, the next rule applies, and that's called the building block rule, which basically says create the foundation first and then build on it. And the goal of that is if you're going to introduce a new application or even a new movement, that could be the first time you introduce a movement or an extended application or come up with something weird and wonderful and wacky for a theme or whatever, it's important to provide at least some practice from familiar setups to help reinforce the rules and the feel of the movement. When you do that, you give a lot of helper words, which takes you to the next rule called the weaning rule. And that's about using helper words. Cluing is the term that they use, and that's to provide clues or hints to the dancers, like we were talking about, heads past the ocean, sides all the way to the far end, right and left through, down the wave or whatever. Clues help the dancers find the correct formation, the correct arrangement, the facing direction, what hands to be used, where the dancer should be, the position, and all sorts of other things. Clues normally do not include part of the definition. Not normally. Like, look at your diamond, or girls in the center, or boys with the left hand. That's not in the definition. That's a clue to the dancers. Cues is when the caller provides direction, which include part or all of the definition. Example, do a do, si, do, back to back. Partner, or do passo, partner left, corner right, back to the partner left with a courtesy turn. You can prompt the cues, and they can be part of the definition. Relay the deucey, half by the right, and the centers go 3. The ends move up and hook on the end. Swing through 6. Boy get off, girl get on. Half by the right, the girls go 3, and the boys move up to an ocean wave. That'll time out at 20 beats, and you're doing it with the dancers. It's cueing. But the weaning rule says when you don't need that anymore, get rid of it. We do this: scoot back, boys in, scoot back, girls flip, boys turn, whatever. Most successful callers provide a combination of both cluing and cueing. Some dancers never learn the moves, and they simply listen for the cues and depend on the caller to tell them what to do. And what happens is you call a movement and you don't say it, your dancers are going to freeze. So you've got to learn to wean them off. Dancers who do not know the moves may interpret cueing or cluing as new directions rather than part of the previous move, and they may start an additional movement. For instance, right and left through. Right pull by and turn the girl. Well, if they know the right and left through, they're listening to the next commands and they're going to do another one. The idea is to be as sparing as possible, as much as you need for the dancers to fill time. Now, I notice now that we're just at the top of the hour. I'm almost done. But by all means, I really appreciate the discussion as we go.
I was going to say, with some calls, I notice quite a lot of callers will say boys scoot back when they don't really mean boys scoot back. They mean everybody scoot back, but the boys go in. Same with flutter wheel. Ladies flutter wheel. And in my opinion, this is wrong. Ladies lead flutter wheel is fine, but to say ladies flutter wheel, the boys shouldn't move because
I will tell you right now that your opinion is correct. It is incorrect to call boys scoot back unless you want the boys to scoot back.
Yep.
And that is bad cueing. It is okay to say scoot back, boys in.
Absolutely.
Or who's looking in, scoot back, or a clue like that. And that's unfortunately a crutch that many callers have developed incorrectly, and it does hurt the dancers.
And sometimes they use it all the time, and they say scoot back boys, scoot back girls. They don't even give you the full clue. Yeah.
And that developed mainly from the timing and the delivery of singing calls, where you get scoot back boy, scoot back girl, and it flows nice.
Yeah, I think that's more
so with the word in, scoot back boys in, scoot back girls in, makes all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. The other thing that sometimes
it's like center zoom.
Yeah, that's another one.
Yes. Another thing that probably we've all been guilty of. I know I have been in the past is to say hinge a quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you do a hinge a quarter, that's only a very fraction of a hinge that you're doing.
Yeah, that's a 16th.
That's right. Yeah.
But you got to be challenged to do that.
Some people who may be in this room have called tips. Not me, by the way. Have called tips where they really did mean hinge a quarter.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
I want to interrupt here because, as Mel pointed out, it is top of the hour. I want to do my usual top of the hour stuff, and then we can continue. Thank you for Dan for electronically hosting this. Thank you, everyone for coming and hanging in and adding to the discussion so far. Some of you staying up pretty late just to be able to join us on this. Thank you, Mel, for presenting a lot of thoughts that make people think as this is coming out by the discussion. Again, if you've only scheduled an hour for this, with the exception of Mel, you're welcome to, or Mel and Dan, you're welcome to leave right now without offending anybody. And before you continue on, Mel, I just wanted to say that a couple of things. One is you have clarified something for me. I thought conventions were where a lot of dancers and callers got together once a year and had a big event. But I guess we're talking different conventions. And just a little background on this whole thing, that, you know, this is a folk activity. And when I got into it, along with several of you guys, there were no written rules, no real conventions and such, and definitely no definitions written down. We passed on these things from one person to the next, and, or, you know, from caller to dancer, and a word that Clark used to use a lot, the gestalt of it just felt like this is what we were supposed to be doing. And then we got organized and decided to do the best we could to define what was going on so that it would be more uniform around the world, around the countries. And then we've tried to clarify with a lot of the conventions and what's a rule and what's just accepted and such. We lucky enough to have Clark here because he was in on doing a lot of these things, but it's a question of, I forgot the right analogy here, but is the dog chasing the tail or the tail chasing the dog? That's not the right one. But again, all these things.
Or prescriptive.
Say that again, Chris.
Descriptive or prescriptive?
That could be a way of putting it. But again, this is what was being done. There were rules to help us unify these, and it was hard to define a lot of these things. We've come a long way in doing a pretty darn good job, and you're doing a nice job of helping interpret what these things are. Some of us that have been around for a long time have sort of defined these a little differently in their minds and what have you, but it's an interesting discussion and a question of, as I think you said in your note to me originally, Mel, there are no square dance police, although some people think they are. And so the bottom line, I was going to say, if you can get away with it, if your dancers do what you want and are still having fun, I think it's all okay. But it's interesting to analyze these rules. Anyway, with that, I'm going to back off and let Mel continue on, and either I don't know how much is left of your formal presentation.
There's not a lot left. I will add, for those of you that do have to leave early or do need to leave early, the presentation, the slides, and the discussion points and all the details that I've mentioned are going to be available in the notes. Dan will have those posted on his website. So you'll have the entire package if you want to go through it and look at the shortened version, or the, what do you call it, the executive summary of the rules and conventions that are in the Color Lab document. Okay, the next one that we had was the extra time convention. And that's delay the movement delivery to give the dancers more reaction time. No, this is more of a convention technique rather than a rule. Okay, the caller can provide additional lead time by delaying the delivery of the moves. This will provide more time for the dancers to react to the moves. This delayed timing can disrupt the normal delivery of the moves and very easily result in a lot of stop and go dancing. The extra reaction time provides time to act on helping words or to apply what they know to the new situation that's being created by difficult choreography. So depending on the complexity of the helping words and the difficulty of the material, that timing can be such that little, if any, compromise of the smoothness is required. The goal should be to retain as much smoothness as is practical for the situation. For example, if I'm in a static square and I say, heads, star through and pass the ocean. Sides, working down the wave with each other, do the right and left through. And I use those. I just put those in there. But this is one of the classic examples. The delay in the timing of that delivery is there so that you know what you're supposed to do and what you're going to do. And you may be standing that extra second, but you know exactly where you're supposed to be. Those delays are built in, especially with unfamiliar choreography, to introduce something different that allows the dancers to establish and recognize where they are, what they're doing, and where they're supposed to end up. The most common of these is at plus, where it became almost part of the name of the call. Dixie style to an ocean wave. Take a peek, trade the wave. Okay, that take a peek was just that little bit of extra delay on the timing to allow the dancers to go forward, have a look, and it became part of it. So that's the extra time convention that gets built into some of these things. There's another one called the movement modification convention. And all of these are actually written in the conventions. I'm giving you pretty much what's written in there. This usually applies when callers fractionalize or suspend the completion of a movement to do something else or something's different at the end of the definition. We talked at the beginning about the movement do passo as a classic example. Do passo does not end in an alamandar. That's a suspended completion. That's a movement modification. There's a tendency to modify definitions, and it's growing all the time. When modifying definitions, however, as I've noted earlier, all the rules and the conventions need to apply. It's very hard for dancers to keep track of these things, so it's very important that callers do it, especially if they're going to start manipulating choreography. This rule simply states, or this convention simply states, if you're going to change something, make sure it's clear to the dancers what you want and what they're expected to do. Example, square through. But on the third hand, or at plus, load the boat, but center, stop in the wave. As a couple, as opposed to the couples rule, or as opposed to as couples. As a couple, instead of as couples, because that's advanced, but as a couple can be used as a modifier at every level. However, as couples is an advanced concept. So the reason for that clarity is that dancers learn by single memory chunks based on the full movement. And they've got to have clarity and simplicity so they can understand it when you're doing these modifications. They need that extra little bit of information to interpret that automatic reaction and figure out if the modification applies to them. You can have, Alan, you did this one day, what was it? Head square through and sides do an 8-chain-4 or something along that line simultaneously. I wish I had written it all down because it was absolutely brilliant. But it's, oh my God, we're doing two completely different movements, but everybody's working integrated together. It really makes a difference. There's another one called the give them space rule. Okay, dancers must be able to move comfortably without being squeezed. Example, that veer to the left. That's the same position rule, veer to left from facing lines. If dancers are squeezed into a tight area, they cannot dance smoothly. Moves involving two couples in the center of the set can either be smooth or not smooth, depending on the combination of calls. An example of this would be starting from a double pass-through formation. Centers swing through feels smooth, but from the same formation, I've got this 8-chain-4, and then I'd call centers pass the ocean swing through. That's going to get very congested and very uncomfortable, even on an uncrowded floor, because the inactive dancers now have to back away 2 spots to allow that to happen. From a starting double pass-through formation, if we call flutter wheel or ladies chain in the center, it's very, very tight, and squeezing occurs depending on how you got there. This is more of a common sense rule that's overlooked, and it applies to the whole of the floor, not the square. Crowded halls, I wish, means that you got to make sure you don't press the squares into each other. Lined up squares in a full hall make past the ocean, grand swing through and things like that very uncomfortable. That's why you see when you start getting that, your squares suddenly go from perfectly rowed to offset when you get into those tidal waves, especially going different ways. There's all sorts of things that happen. And if you're watching it, you can see how those rules apply. A lot of people call that square breathing. It's part of square breathing. There's also the momentum rule. The momentum rule is the tendency of dancers to continue moving in an established, usually a forward direction. Sequences which enhance this forward motion are much more comfortable and smoother than those that disrupt. Example, Head star through, double pass through, centers in, bend the line. It's uncomfortable. It's a movement jar. Technically defined, everything else, definition's correct, but that breaks so many rules but in particular, the momentum rule. It's uncomfortable momentum jar. As opposed to heads, star through, double pass through, centers in, cast off 3/4. That's a more comfortable, even though there's a side step, it's not a momentum jar. It's a step and a pivot, which is perfectly fine. And the dancer coming into the center has the momentum forward. So that's where that momentum. Go ahead.
Same is true if you do a heads past the ocean, extend, boys run, bend the line.
Yep. And this is where it's actually the momentum rule. Some people have called it the run in, bend out rule. Never do it. If you run from the outside to the inside, never call a bend a line after that. So finally is all these rules and all these conventions and all these definitions is I cannot present this without mentioning the Applications Review Committee. That was formed in 1998 to review the proper and improper use of square dance calls. That committee is composed of knowledgeable callers from all over the world who review the written requests from callers and dancers, and they decide as to the proper or the improper application of these calls. Essentially, they're the referees. So if there's confusion about this, they're the ones that make the decision. Every caller on the Applications Review Committee has agreed to abide by its decisions. And this committee is unfortunately, in my opinion, reactive rather than proactive. They don't take an active interest in the definitions except to answer questions. And I understand the logic behind that. What they do is they accept questions from dancers and callers, and it does come from both, about proper and improper use of definitions. Now, as Don was saying, there are no such things as square dance police, but these guys are as close as you get to getting a decision. What's important to remember is that little bit at the bottom. It says the ARC decides, but appeals are possible. Okay, the ARC does not always get it right, and they admit that. They're a group of people sitting. They make the best decision they can with the information they have. But if information or questions change or an application changes, they'll go back and review it. There have been times where their decisions have been reversed. However, they have been one of the greatest assets in reducing the misuse of calls over the years by saying, yes, it's proper, or no, it's not. It's that simple. And the way it works is you submit your question, it gets reviewed, they work on it, they deliberate, they dance on it, they see what else can apply or doesn't apply, and eventually they will say yes or no. If yes, they'll say, yeah, it's fine to use it that way, but it's extended or it's really extended, or use it with caution. Or they'll say, no, don't use it. It's wrong. It's improper. If you're satisfied with the no, or sorry, if you're not satisfied with the no answer, resubmit it, give more information as to why, and it'll be reevaluated. The example I use on this is 2003. The ARC decided that AC-doocy is improper from a 3/4 tag position. Don't use it. It's wrong. It can't be done that way. Everybody stopped using it, including the caller who asked the question, because they all agreed to abide by the rules. But that guy was not satisfied with that being listed as improper, and he reframed his argument following the revision for clarity. He then resubmitted the question, and in 2006, 3 years later, they said, yes, they voted it is now a proper use of the call. The new definition, because they rewrit the definition to include everything, permits the uses as there are, 4 centers and 4 outside dancers. So the ruling supersedes the earlier ruling. So they admit they don't always get it right, but with more information, they're more than willing to review. So the ARC decision and all the rest of it, they can be found on the Caller Lab websites. I've also sent the most current documents to Don. The ARC has not sat since 2017 with any new revisions. But these are the resources that you've got, all the programs and definitions, the formation arrangement charts, the guidelines, the ARC decisions, they're all there. I don't know if all those links are still active. They were when I last checked them, but Caller Lab is revamping its website. So, but if you just do the Google search, you can find all of that kind of stuff. Come on. And I suddenly have a lockup. Hello.
Hello.
Did I just lose my screen?
I am, whoops, now you just stopped sharing.
There we
Okay.
go.
That was allowed. No, my screen just went black. I don't know what happened there. Okay, well, that's a lot of information. And like I said, it's one of the things that happens an awful lot with the rules and definitions. It's something that is not, in my opinion, given enough time to in teaching callers foundation fundamental skills. We focus way too heavy on choreographic complexity rather than the basic foundations of why we use what we use the way we use it. There was one question that came up, and I would like to address that if we can. And where is it? Just a second. Page not found. Of course not. Page not found. There it is. I'm going to throw this over there. And I'm just going to share my screen for a second here. Dan?
Should be able to. There we go.
Okay. So pass through. Now this was the question. And there's the squared set convention, and that should apply to every level. It does not apply, or so I've been told, it does not apply consistently at the challenge level. And the reason it doesn't apply consistently at the challenge level is because of the complexity of the stuff. But I would argue that at the challenge level, it does apply, because usually if the challenge caller is calling, the next call will define where you're supposed to be, where you're supposed to end up. So if your action is going forward, if at challenge I called head pass through and cross cloverleaf, I know that's not challenge, but then the action is forward and away from the center. And that delivery and the timing is done so that the next call will let you know where you want to go. So the passing rule does apply. But if I just call heads pass through and there's a delay, from what I've been told, at challenge, they stay in the center and they wait for the next call in case there's something complex that needs them to do something in the center, like for instance, an inverted reversed angled cross trail through where they go to the outside couple from the center where they turn back and the boys cross over to the right-hand side. I don't know. I'm just making crap up right now because I don't dance that, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about.
Well, this friendly debate argument that I had with my friend, the challenge caller, I said that if you want the dancers to end up in the middle of the set after calling a right and left through or a pass through from a squared set, you first of all need to say head couple step forward and then pass through, and they will end up in the center, or head couple step forward, right and left through, and they will end up in the center. But if you just call pass through or right and left through, then they should leave the center clear for the side couples to then do a square through or a pass the ocean or star through or whatever.
And what you're saying is true if you're calling at a mainstream or plus dance. But I assure you, almost every challenge caller, when they call heads pass through, without saying any extra words like heads go into the middle, when they call heads pass through at a challenge dance, they expect the heads to be in the middle, and then the call split circulate once and a half would be proper after that.
Yep.
I was going to say split circulate and the heads roll, and you have a double pass through setup.
Yeah. Now here's the question: Do you call heads pass through split circulate?
Yes.
Or heads pass through and split circulate and the sides roll, or the sides whatever they
Heads
do.
roll. Yeah.
That's how you call it, isn't it?
Yes.
You don't call it. You do not call heads pass through, split circulate, and the sides roll.
No, you.
Heads roll.
I know what you're asking. You're asking, if there's no, if the delay to the next call is a long time, does that mean to get out of there? And challenge callers would say no. I would say heads to heads.
And this is what, yeah, and this is exactly where the argument is, because in the rule, if I called at challenge heads pass through, I should be able to then say sides pass the ocean with no problem. I know from discussion that would never happen without having the heads to make that adjustment, and you get all sorts of looks sideways from the dancers in the head position because they expect to do something in the middle. the rule is actually accurate. They would pass through and they would go to the next outside position. If it's called heads pass through, split circulate, the timing of the delivery of the next call would dictate that they would stay in the middle. And that's where the comfort comes.
Yeah, but
Now, that being said, hang on, Chris, hang on a second. There is actually in the rules, and that's when we talk about command timing delivery alters the smoothness rule. But when you do that, I've heard this discussion about pass-through challenge. And like I said, I don't dance challenge, I don't call challenge, but this has come up in discussion repeatedly. And this is what I was saying. This has almost become an unwritten convention for challenge dancing, and it's creeping down into A2 dancing as well, that when you call this, you stay in the middle because you're active unless there's something that says get out of the middle. Well, as opposed to the other way around. It's completely reversed.
There's a lot of rules written down, and there are at least 3 of them in play at the moment. The one that Clark is mentioning is that pass through is done from facing couples, and so when they're the thing about getting in the middle is that they have to become facing couples. The business about getting to the outside is some kind of weird exception that seems to be applicable sometimes, but there's like 3 rules there, and there's nothing that says, there's no wording there that says you'll know when the next call requires it because the delay will be less than 2.3 seconds or something. There's no rule like that. It's just there's 3 conflicting rules, and there's nothing that prioritizes one over the other. And so that's why there's this ambiguity and these different conventions at the different levels.
This happens to be a very clear case of a general problem that I've seen people having, and the other cases is people arguing about who's your partner in an ocean wave. Is it the person next to you or the person facing the same way you are? If callers can't decide, if callers interpret it differently, different callers interpret it differently, then how do you expect the dancers to know?
Well, the fact of the matter is that
let me finish, Chris. Let me finish. The basic common sense thing here is if it's ambiguous to the callers, it's ambiguous to the dancers, and therefore don't call it or use helper words, heads pass through, step ahead so the sides can do with this, or heads pass through, partner, trade, and roll, and stay in the middle. If we can't decide on it, don't expect the dancers to clarify it so that they will know what you want or stay away from it.
Well, I agree that you can't expect them to read your mind, but I will point out that there's no problem in that it works fine at challenge, and it also works fine at are plus callers having a problem now because the dancers are not getting out of the way. Is that a real problem? Is that a real thing?
Chris,
not that there's no problem.
Yeah, Chris, what I have to interject here because it actually is clarified as to what it is. The passing rule, or sorry, the rule on the pass through is clarified. The timing and delivery of the next call, the smoothness of that, these are what we're going to soft skills, and they deal with such things as timing, the 2-beat rule, all the rest of this, the hand delivery, the timing, all those aspects of variety are all clarified in the Caller Lab guidelines. There is nothing that, hang on, Chris, there's nothing that says when you call a pass through, if you pause for 2/3 of a second, then you are supposed to move to the, no, they don't clarify that. What they do say is when you do a pass through or with any other call, the movement or the dance action of the next call, that's your forward momentum action, will dictate the position of where you're going to go into.
Right.
And
the dance action,
multiple rule. It's timing delivery.
But it doesn't say timing there. Show me where it says timing in that sentence.
Okay. This is where you've got your flow rules and your 2-beat rule into giving commands.
Yeah, so you've got multiple, so now you have 4 different rules that are all conflicting with each other.
That are all operating synonymously with each other.
Yeah, and there's no priority ordering. You show me the priority ordering.
I understand that, Chris. I'm not arguing with that. I'm not saying that they're perfect, but at the same time, it's no different than the veer to the left from facing dancers. That rule, it doesn't say that those centered dancers squeeze together and you work as couples. That's common sense because 2-couple dancing does not apply to veer to the left from facing lines. What does apply is the same position rule that is applicable as couples dancing as single dancers. Now, it doesn't say if you're doing an as couples, it says they're working as a couple, but that position rule. They circulate once and a half from facing lines. Applies two different rules concurrently, but it doesn't prioritize where they go. And
Yeah.
I'm not in disagreement with you. There are a lot of major gaps. And as Don was saying, if we have, sorry, I'm supposed to be stopping share here, hitting the wrong buttons. If we have rules that are sitting in place that we use constantly, this does not become a big issue until at challenge. This should be where the challenge committee should be sitting down and writing a convention, which is not a convention, a qualifier to that rule applicable at that level. The same as we have right and left through at plus or higher. The same as we have past the ocean at plus or higher. That's all that would take is for the ARC or the challenge committee to add that into the conventions to clarify that. Unfortunately, nobody at that level has sat down and actually written that. And this is why we get these discussions.
Yeah, but the thing is that we don't need to write it down because everybody at challenge already knows it.
So
Can I just chime in? Can I just chime in? And probably put a spanner in the works. When I first started calling, I always thought that when they said heads, that they automatically stepped to the center. But that's obviously not true. But why do we need them to return to the original spots? That's one of the questions I'd like to pose. But also, let's go to the circle rule, where you say as soon as you say heads or sides,
or define for dancers, yeah.
You expect them to form a square, and I presume by that you mean that they step in.
No.
Is that not true?
No, that's not true. What it is, okay, I'm going to deal first. Hang on, Alan, I'm going to deal with yours in just a second. But I want to answer Chris's question that was still sitting there, and I'll come right back to you.
I'm still talking, but right.
Yep, go ahead.
So if you say from a circle, sides or the boys, and you're going to do something with them, do they actually step in? So that you now have a situation where the others form couples on the ends and they form couples in the middle. Or
you don't.
If you expect them to do a call and then return back to the circle, do you?
No. The circle rule is if you define two adjacent dancers as opposing couples, the rules of a squared set convention would apply to that. For instance, circle left, heads half sachet. I'm not going into the center. I'm talking about the original heads, or heads California twirl, circle left this way. And of course you wouldn't do that because you'd crash people. What is defined is when you identify, the rule is when you identify the two adjacent dancers in the circle, the squared set convention applies to the next call that you are going to use. If that call takes them into the center, they go into the center. You could easily say, join hands, circle right, heads as a couple roll back. Well, they don't go into the center, but I've defined an action, or just the heads backtrack, lady in the lead, head couples backtrack, once and a half around until you meet the sides, hinge into a wave or whatever. Because I've defined the action that they're supposed to take in or out. Most of them are in, I understand that, but it's defined by the next call. Chris, coming back to you on the pass-through. No, you just said something which is very, very important, and why I wanted to say it needs to be done at the challenge level. Most challenge dancers do this. I've met now 5 callers that started calling at challenge and have come down, and they bring challenge things such as this down into basic and mainstream. Really, really good callers, and there's a few of them I've heard, they started calling at the level, and then they went back and they took caller schools and they learned basic and mainstream and have gone through all that whole process. The reason it needs to be written is the same reason why right and left through or past the ocean needs the clarification qualifier at basic, because the rule is there and the rule is very clear. If there's a qualifier at a higher level, it needs to be written into that level, and it needs to be transferred down to the basic rules that at challenge this applies. That's why the conventions are there. And that's why that qualifications, everybody understands it, a challenge. I agree with that. I understand that. and that's probably how they do it. I don't dance it, but
All you're
that
doing
kind
is all you're doing is creating problems for the future. You should
Clark.
be you should be working the other way, sweeping out of the systems things that are inconsistent and wind up with choreography that's consistent right across all levels.
Yes. But as
Clark
one of
has
my
been
ex-wives
trying to-
used to say, don't shoot on me. It happens all the time.
Well, you
Clark
know,
has been
the
trying
main
to throw
reason why
something
it's
in
really
for quite a while.
the main reason why it really isn't a problem, I don't think, is that the kinds of choreography that rely on them being in the middle without it being really obvious that you want them to stay there, as would be understood by a mainstream or a plus dancer or whatever, don't usually come up at the lower levels. And so the only question is things like heads right and left through, side ladies chain. And so what I teach the dancers there, so first of all, dancers operate by examples, not by definitions, right? I mean, challenge dancers operate by definitions. Real dancers, they operate by example. And so all the examples they see are heads pass through, heads right, the ladies chain, blah, 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 squared set spots. So that's what they're going to be thinking. And so there's only a few times where it's really going to, at that level, where it's really going to be ambiguous at all. And that's why I was saying earlier, when I teach my dancers, I tell them what the rule is, right? But I also tell them, you know, sometimes the guy might really want you to be in the middle. It's due to the weaselly wording of the, you know, depending on the next call thing. And that's basically what I say to them.
I agree.
I want to interrupt for a second here because you two guys really should get a room. You've been arguing the same point for about 15, 20 minutes now.
I want to say something about the circle rule.
Clark had his hand and wanted to say something, but I'm going to interject something.
And so does Helen.
I want to interject something first. Along these particular lines, even at party nights, and Alan, even at party nights, I'll do it, you know, heads pass through and turn back individually and join hands, circle left. Now the four boys go forward and back, do a do-si-do, back out the side. The four girls go forward and circle left and then back out. I'll tell them to back out. Sometimes they'll back out as a couple where they came from. Sometimes they switch in between the guys. It doesn't matter to me. I've got them dancing. I have the guys swing the nearest girl or the girls swing the nearest guy. They don't have to know the rules. They just have to keep moving and being entertained. Whether, you know, I'll have them stay in the middle for a while, then I'll tell them to back out when I want to. It's just overkill a little here. But Clark's been looking for a while, and Helen, I'll have you next. Clark, did you remember what you were going to say about 20 minutes ago?
So we wouldn't be having this argument or this discussion of where heads pass through ends at challenge if the challenge definition said the squared set convention at challenge works like this. The people go into the middle, they do the call, they remain in the middle always. So the question is not, should it have that? But if, as I said, all challenge dancers and callers know this, why isn't it written in the challenge definitions? And the answer is, in 2004, the 26th issue that the definitions committee faced was called Squared Set Convention for Dance Programs Beyond Mainstream, because we had just written the Squared Set Convention for Mainstream, which is now split into basic and mainstream. And at the time we wrote it, we knew it was correct for mainstream. And we knew it was wrong for challenge, but we didn't know where it became, where the change happened. So we asked the question, what should the definitions committee do about this? And 22 people voted that we should work on it, and 12 voted we should not work on it, and 4 abstained. And then I asked some more questions like, where does it change? And everyone agreed pretty much that, like, the question asked was, if you call heads turn through, where do they end? And how many should end, how many people say it should end on the squared set spots? And a few people said only mainstream, more people said mainstream and plus, the same number of people said mainstream plus and advanced, and no one basically said mainstream plus, advanced, and C1 and C2. But 6 people did say all dance programs. That's the, we should square dance the same way at all dance programs, no matter what, hard and fast rule, even if that violates how people dance today. So given that, and then should we have a transition program where we don't, you know, maybe we transition at advanced and we don't, you have to be more clear at advanced as a caller. So this went around and around, but the bottom line is it has remained on our, as an open issue since 2005, quote, waiting for someone to work on me. And we have discussed it, but at the moment, it's still waiting for someone to work on them. And, you know, this discussion today could encourage somebody like Guy, who's chairman of the committee, and Dottie Welch, who's vice chairman, to go work on it. Because had they worked on it, we wouldn't have spent all this time today. We would know that it's just in the challenge definitions.
What I find interesting, we spent 20 minutes discussing pass-through and saying, well, challenge does it like this, and they dance by the definitions, but they don't, because that is the definition. And you're right, simple qualification would have clarified that. Helen, you had your hand up first, and then Chris.
Yeah, okay. I've learned to dance in Sweden, and I think we follow the definitions quite well, which means that an allemand left is, you know, the left arm here, you're going round. Then I came to Australia, and Brian said allemand left.
Pigeon
and
wing.
I grabbed the arm, and I mean, it was all wrong. You don't do it that way in Australia. Now, is there anywhere I could have been prepared for this? And I think also when you say circle to a line, I think something funny happened. It was certainly not the definition, I think.
The beer half sachet, slide backward and twist.
Yeah, something, I don't know. It wasn't it wasn't what I expected anyway. Something happened just. And is there anywhere that this is, I mean, you talk about regional differences. This is obviously regional differences. Is there anywhere this is written down so I'm going to Australia now? What do they do in Australia? You know, or I'm going to
unfortunately, no. When I moved here, I had exactly the same effect happen to me, and I got exactly the same. I think one of the first dances I went to was at your club, Alan, back in 2005, 2006, and I put my hand down there for an ocean wave. Or sorry, I put my hand up here for an ocean wave. Now what? And then when we did an allemand left, it was this funny pigeon wing thing. Kinesthetically, it takes about 3.5 pounds of pressure to dislocate somebody's shoulder and elbow doing that allemand left the way it's done in Australia. But it's the way they do it. And they have that expression, Collar Lab recognizes regional differences. Unfortunately, regional differences are very, very rarely put out to understand. And it is a good thing. It's a good statement, but it's also a dangerous statement because a lot of regional differences become local interpretations of that's the way I'm doing it. That's the way we do it in our region. So Collar Lab says it's right. I don't have an answer. I wish there was.
I propose Collar Lab create a regional differences manual. No, please not. But
you can chair that. We expect the first draft in about 30 years.
You know, I see a couple hands up, but I'm going to throw something in. As I mentioned earlier, this has been a folk activity evolving for years and decades, and Collar Lab has tried to make it uniform and created committees to try to identify things that make everybody happy. We have an amazing resource among this small group of people, and that's Clark, that's been in a lot of this, so it's worth listening to a lot of the things he's saying, you know, like the fact that this pass-through rule or stay in the center rule or not has been chaired because nobody's really cared because it always seems to take care of itself. Chris, I know your hand was up, but I'm going to let Brian talk because you've been talking a lot for a second. Go for it, Brian.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, there's a few differences that we have in Australia. essentially, I think there's 3 figures that we do that are different styling to the definitions in the handbook. One is Alaman left, another one is promenade, and the other one is stars. We use the pack saddle star grip in the middle instead of the pile up star in the center. But I find that wherever I go, it's easy to adopt whatever system it is that they're dancing in wherever you're going. Like, we don't have people come here and have lots of trouble because our Alaman lefts are different, or our promenades are different, or our stars are different. It is just a styling difference, and it doesn't take long for the dancers to get used to it. I can dance any of the styles, but I really, really do prefer our promenade, and I think I would prefer that everybody adopted the Australian style of promenade, which is the escort position rather than the skater's waltz position. I feel as though I'm dragging the girl around the square if I've got my hands crossed in front, whereas if I have my arm around the girl and left hands joined, I feel as though I'm a couple with the lady and we're dancing together rather than me dragging around the set.
A regional difference, I think, a bit of history is that it started, to my knowledge, with the Alaman left, with the ocean wave, whether it's hands up or forearms. New England was strongly forearm. Most of the rest of the country was hands up. Color Lab went with the majority and said, we'll do it hands up. New England said, we'll follow Color Lab, except we're not going to change this. And there were enough Color Lab leaders in New England also that we finally said, we're not going to change. It's a regional difference. Live with it. Where, when in Rome, do as the New Englanders do. And now it's interpreted obviously in the promenade and the Alamans and other things.
Arm turns.
Box the net becomes very problematic with an ocean wave and a forearm grip.
One of the calls where I think I do prefer the arm down is pickup chain, as opposed to the pigeon wing.
There are pros and cons to a lot of these, and I'd rather not get into that argument again. Let's accept regional differences. One more moment, Chris, but Helen had her hand up, and I think it was probably a relative to.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking it would be a good thing if you somewhere could find regional differences, if it's not too difficult, because obviously it seems that in the United States, in one place you'll do Alaman left the proper way, and in other places you'll do it the other way. Is that correct? So maybe it's not possible to sort of list everything.
That's actually why I had my hand up. I was gonna respond to you and point out that it's not, we say regional differences, but my observation is that you can go to a dance and encounter people doing all three different things in the same square, and certainly among different squares. And it's not really regional. It's more of just, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And maybe you'll go to some place and they'll do it this different way. But I'm used to, especially at a convention or something, where you have people from all over. But even just in, say, in New England or something, from one club to another, or from one couple to another in the same club, people are going to have, so you could maybe make a list of all the different things that are out there, but I wouldn't try to pin them down to a particular region and say, if I go to Australia, they're going to do this.
Mini regions and micro regions. Clark, you had your hand up.
So a couple of comments around what we've been discussing. When Color Lab started out with all this stuff, they had a definition committee that did the definitions for mainstream. And they had a separate styling committee, which did the styling. And the styling sometimes conflicted with the definitions. And they had a timing committee that was separate from the other two. And then the home office put all three together and printed them. And that was a bit of a mess, as Barry Clasper would call it, a dog's breakfast. And it remained like that for quite a while. When we did the mainstream rewrite, the only reason the mainstream rewrite started or came up And you'll notice that Mel presented this in a logical fashion, but the history of how they came about wasn't quite as logical.
Yeah. I look back on something and I go, what the?
Yeah, you smoothed over some stuff. One reason the advanced definitions have a lot better prefatory material than mainstream and plus has had for a long time is finally by the time we were allowed to do the advanced definitions, fewer callers were involved and more common sense was able to prevail, and the challenge got even better. So when we came back around the loop to try to rewrite the mainstream definitions, partly that's because the internet was invented and email and news groups. And there was a Square Dance Callers news group where all sorts of crazy questions were asked. Can you do this? Now that Caller Lab has these definitions, it says this, can we do this? And knowledgeable people would get on and go, no, 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 this means this, and that should be fixed, and blah, blah, blah. And all the time on the news group was spent explaining to and solving arguments about what's right, what's legal, as it was called back then, as opposed to proper and improper. And it was kind of like, let's just rewrite these things and solve all these problems once and for all. Now, what you slowly come to realize is we won't solve all these problems once and for all. We'll just make it a lot better and hopefully dancers and callers a lot more knowledgeable. But the older definitions, they had the ocean wave rule and the facing couples rule. And like Chris jokes, I can't honestly tell you, even though if anyone should be able to, it would be me, which one's which. I always have to go look it up because the name isn't the name I would have given them.
Yeah,
It's
they're posed.
Inherited.
By the way, the heuristic I identified today is the name of the rule is the formation that you're in before you apply the rule.
Oh, interesting. Okay, if I can remember that, that'll be good. But
I've looked at it as ocean wave means facing couples means ocean waves.
Yeah, they're exactly backwards, right?
They are.
I used to use that one, and then I was thinking about it earlier today, and then I suddenly realized that even thinking that way, I confused myself. So when Mel was talking, I was like, oh, it's when you're in facing couples, that's when you're going to use the facing couples rule, and so on.
No,
anyway.
other way around.
So the definitions committee for the rewrite, we invented two new rules out of whole cloth, right?
Yeah.
Which is the squared set convention, which we called a convention because we knew it wasn't a hard and fast rule, and it has some weasel words in it about what a convention means and all that, which you covered, you covered accurately. And the circle rule, that didn't exist until the new set of definitions was done. While doing the new set of definitions, there's always this, how complete do you make them? And we wanted to make them very complete, but the mainstream committee didn't want to make them complete.
I know.
But we had that tug of war the whole time, and that's why it took so long to get them done. And for example, in Circle to Align, we originally documented the other version, the so-called slide and slap version that Helen encountered. And that was, I think, as I remember, voted out. And there's a comment in there that alludes to it, but doesn't say how to do it. Because if we said how to do it, then people might start doing it. And the people in mainstream who are hard and fast, follow our rules and only our styling, didn't want to really admit to other stuff. So I would have been happy to even have an appendix at the end of the whole mess that says, hey, in Sweden, they do this, in this country, they do that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, there's that weasel thing. Thank you, Mel. The definition gives the proper way. There are other dance actions in popular use. Right. And that's the best we could put in, given certain people on the mainstream committee who had larger than life voices and wouldn't let us do everything. And everything the definitions committee did had to be approved by the mainstream committee. And we felt that was so powerful a voice that we had to go with that.
The circle and slide to align thing for circle to align is the perfect example of that, and Alaman left are the perfect examples of things that you'll see at the same dance in the same club, different people doing different things. And just as an aside, I remember at one point the circle and slide thing got to be so popular that I think it was a Collar Lab thing, kind of like a quarterly whatever focus thing.
Selection. Yep.
Yeah, selection. There was some kind of a resolution or something I saw going by that that involved something called the Circle to Align Preservation Dance, which was some choreography that somebody had come up with that was intended to, I don't know if it was only supposed to work if you do it the right way or whatever, but it was, it was like, maybe we're not going to have the traditional way of doing it anymore. This slidey thing is taken over so much. We got to do something. So
I was vice chairman of the Mainstream Quarterly Selection Committee for about 10 years. I don't particularly remember that one.
I don't think it was a quarter. I mean, it wasn't a QS thing, but it was some other similar memo that went out.
Right. Yeah,
had a lot of choreography with a half sachet centers on a circle to align and circle 4 3/4 and all those other kind of things to break it up. So you had to do a circle to align properly.
Yeah, we don't do the slide to align very often here. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't have dancers that do it, but I think most of the time the dancers in Australia do the circle to align as it is in the definition, where you circle halfway and then the man or the left-hand dancer that led to the right lets go, and then they just slide out while the others unfurl to align, which is the normal definition.
I want to comment on one other thing that came up briefly, and that was challenge dancers. We haven't talked about what the styling is at a challenge dance.
No.
But some things might be a little different than mainstream. And as challenge dancers and callers dance in other clubs and across all the programs, they may try to bring and unwittingly try to bring their styling, which they probably think is better, into your dance, your mainstream or plus dance. And I don't think that's a good thing. The dancers may do it unknowingly. The callers should know what they're doing and be more respectful of each program's styling and way of teaching and doing stuff.
I'd like to comment on something just before you get there, Helen. What you said, Clark, is one of the things that I was going at with what you were saying, Chris. It is the fact that everybody in this group and several others are talking about the rules, the definitions, and guidelines. I've had a lot of people send me emails saying, "Can you send me a copy of those? I've never read those. And these are callers that have been doing it for a long time." And it's absolutely true. But I agree that in an ideal world, your rules and your guidelines and your definitions written for Basic 1 should be the same rules, definitions, and guidelines that are at Challenge 4. I also agree that if there is a qualifier that goes at Advanced, this might happen, or at Plus, this might happen, at Challenge, this might happen, that if there is a convention or a qualifier that is programmed, that should be written into the guidelines. So you've got one document that applies to every program level. That's an ideal world. We all know that that's not going to happen. And everybody will put their own interpretations on these things. But the fact that we're talking about it, I think, Don, you made the comment right at the beginning partway there. If you give the dancers the option of 2, they're going to take the ones that you don't want. Or if you leave it open for interpretation, if callers can't agree, how are our dancers supposed to agree? And it is a problem that does need to be fixed, and it's something that does need to be addressed. Helen, go ahead.
I was just going to say that when I went my very first convention, I think I was mainstream, and it was sort of concentration all the time to be able to do it right. Then the very last tip was, everyone was going to dance the very last tip. So it was a basic tip. And I was squared up with some high level dancers, and it wasn't good because they were doing things that I, as a basic dancer, didn't know what they were doing. And at that point, they should have, I think, sort of decided that, okay, we're dancing basic. Now, what were the basic rules? How do we do things? And sort of danced basic. But it seemed to me, a pretty new dancer, that they didn't know how to dance. And I mean, it shouldn't be like that. As if definitions were the same, or the rules were the same from basic right all the way up. But obviously things happen because, well, you know more, and you want more things, so that you change things.
It's not really a level thing a lot most of the time. The a very similar thing is you get on a square of people, and the call is right and left grand or weave the ring, and instead of doing something that is more standard and traditional, people will do some kind of a, clapping the hands and patty cake, and then you cross the hands and twist the girl this way and they slides around behind you, or all that kind of crazy stuff every time, or is it every other time, or people do all kinds of things like that. It has nothing to do with dance level or anything.
And those become local club things. I know when I started dancing in Germany, one of the things that was very, very common is we were showed this kind of stuff. They actually showed us, hey, if you go to the dance, somebody may do this, somebody may do it. But we were also taught that what we do in our own club, we don't do when we go to a dance unless it's discussed beforehand. And that was a common, that was just common courtesy. What Clark was saying earlier about the wishy-washy fudge, especially on circle to a line, I really loved the one comment that they made on there, which puts the onus completely on the dancers to do, but it says dancers and callers, and that's at the end of circle to line. They say dancers and callers should be aware that they may encounter these variations, but then they put on the end, and this call requires cooperation to be danced successfully. Now, how do you get cooperation if you don't know what's gonna, it's like, oh, well, we've got to cooperate, which means we've got to conduct this little seminar before we have our dance on the floor to say, are you doing it this way? Are you doing it this way? But Chris, you pointed out, you first big convention I went to, yeah, there's all sorts of, everybody's doing things different. You adapt very quickly. And as long as somebody is not overpowering, or you put your hand down for an Alaman left and they grab your thumb and bring you up to a chicken wing and dislocate your elbow, it's not usually a problem. So
the way that I learned the circle and slide thing was not from anybody saying, hey, look, we're going to do it this way. I was just at a dance one day and they did that. And I'm like, say what? Oh, all right, whatever.
It's interesting when you watch a circle and slide and somebody's actually doing a circle to line and they don't let go of the hands. And people will get, actually, some ladies in particular will get very upset because that's not the way we do it. That's not the way it's taught. That's not the way it's done. Well, yeah, it is, but
it is kind of strange when you learn to dance. There are lots and lots and lots of rules, and you have to learn them, and there's this and that and the next thing. But then suddenly, when you do a circle to the line, there are no rules at all. Or suddenly, when you do an Allemande left, the rules don't apply. So I mean, it's kind of, it's funny, isn't it? We discuss details of a certain call at no length of, at all lengths of time, but then suddenly no rules, and that's fine. It just seems very strange to me that that's the way it is.
Yeah.
Well, what's funny is that you get the people who are C4 dancers, say. And so I'm just saying that because I'm trying to think of the people who are the most focused on the definitions and exactly how to accomplish the movements and what is the traffic pattern going to be for this crazy once removed thing or whatever. And super knowledgeable about the definition. You get those kind of people, right? Totally focused on that aspect of things. And those at the same time are the people who are like, oh yeah, well, sometimes you do it this way, sometimes you do it the other way.
Dan put a comment in the chat that says it's an indication of why he, and I've heard this from others, find traditional square dancing more appealing than modern Western square dancing. And he also put on there dropping objections to some of the standard applications that are specified in the SSD documents and a few other things. And I'm going to be talking about SSD in my program, product placement, but the standard applications document is another document that many, many callers have not read or even know exists. They just think standard application is boy on the left, girl on the right, and you do it one way only, that's it. Don't ever do it anything else.
What was that person saying?
Not.
They liked traditional dancing because it had the variety or because it didn't?
Well, that was me, and it was. I think my thing is that very few of my dancers go to other clubs, and when they do, I mean, for the most part, I teach the regional stuff that we do here, the circle to a line as the slide over and back, and I teach them that there are other things. But I think that so much of this kind of detail-oriented stuff takes away from the sense of dancing, and drives away, it attracts a certain sort of dancer and drives away another sort of dancer. And I think that there is more market for the other sort of dancer. And so trying to find, ways to appeal to that other sort of dancer and not let it become mired in the definitions and all of the details is why SSD appeals to me, and why I'm looking for, why I'm looking at, okay, what are the various other dance forms doing? How is content getting around?
What's interesting with your comment, Dan, is all of these rules and conventions that we discuss, they do apply to SSD.
Yes.
Every single one of them. I wanted to clarify on that. What you said there is exactly what the intent is. For instance, your dancer does not have to know the page and a half of the passing rule. Your dancer, the caller needs to know that, but your dancer needs to know, hey, if you are going to walk and you're going to butt noses, pass right shoulders. Or they need to know, if you two are going to end up in the same spot, make a right hand mini wave. As a caller, you need to know the rest of that. Don't put two dancers facing the same direction or in T-bone directions. Don't put them. That rule applies to you as a caller. The dancer needs to know, if you get in the same spot, make a mini wave. And that's where that judgment thing is. There was a trend, I can't remember who said it in one of the other sessions that you had, about they didn't agree with giving the dancers the definitions and all of this stuff, because they don't need to know that. All they need to know is how I explain it. This is how you dance it. That's all you need to know. And that works if you give a good explanation, but it also works only if you understand, as the instructor, all the rest of the stuff that goes into the background and apply it consistently.
When I started contra dancing in traditional squares, I asked them, what's the proper way to hold your hands for a promenade, to hold your arms for an Allemande left. And they said, we don't have any standard way, do it any way you want. It took 5 minutes of dancing, maybe 5 times dancing, I don't recall, to see that they pretty much all did it the same way. So I ended up doing it the way they did. Mm-hmm. But they didn't have written rules and nobody argued about it, and it worked. One thing, Dan, that you just said about attracting a certain kind of people, but the other kind are in the majority. I can't exactly remember what, but Clark used to talk about double filtering, which that reminded me of. Clark, you want to explain what that was? Because that was pretty good.
So right now we run, I'll use SSD as an example. So let's say you run SSD and you get a group of people and it's growing and they like SSD and so forth. And then you want to go on to plus or advanced. You're only going to have the people who both liked SSD and like plus and advanced. And so we shouldn't be changing the product. And in fact, even a one night stand, people do a one night stand, they circle left, they circle right, you jolly them through a bunch of stuff. This is fun. And the people who like that come back, and then suddenly they have to learn how to do square through 4 and be on a grid and swing through and boys run and be very precise about it. So that's kind of double filtering. And I think there's a lot of times where we do accidentally double filter and we only end up with the survivors, the people who like the first product, like the second product, and like the third product, which makes us wonder at challenge, should we only solicit and try to get people from nothing to challenge rather than going through all that other stuff? But generally that hasn't worked well either. So that's not the solution. The other thing I was going to say is for Dan, you should consider Cal Campbell's CDP book, which I think he's now put, as a PDF online, because it has a ton of dances, which I use at my father-daughter Girl Scout dances. And I've always thought it would be fun to have a group where I could pick any dance in that book and do it for them and that they would enjoy it. Because it has a huge amount of dances with not a ton of calls, you know, only 10 or 12 calls and plus 1 or 2 things you might teach before you teach one of the dances. Yeah, I think it has a lot to offer. That said, I don't think very many people are doing what's in that book on a regular basis with a group. I'll also say that it's interesting that when the contra callers and the traditional square dance callers get together, they never have arguments about where pass through from a squared set ends. And they don't even have books of definitions. They all know it and learned it from dancing and then became callers and then pick up more dances. And the dance is a written thing. And whatever it does, that's what you have to walk through and get your dancers through. There is no right or wrong.
It's the challenge of trying to keep the folk aspect in the product that we have, and they're in contrast to each other, and so you can't really.
Yep. I posted the link to that from the Color Lab website, and then if you just go back one, that'll also take you to the rest of the community dance program resources and the videos that Cal's got up there on the Color Lab knowledge base.
And yeah, I've got the book on my shelf.
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured you probably would.
Yep.
Was there a question about 30 or 40 minutes ago about the circle rule? Something got started about that, and I didn't quite get whether there was a confusion there.
Alan was asking between the circle and the squared set, if you nominate couples, do they automatically go into the middle, and then the others reform to make a square? It doesn't, not so much the angle of orientation, but the square is actually established. And that's not what the rule says. That's the most commonality, because you might say circle, you got heads, half sash, heads, circle left, 4 boys. Suddenly now you've got a squared set of boys going into the middle. But you could just as easily go from a circle, you know, head couples, backtrack single file, or head couples, girl and lead, backtrack single file, where they don't go into the middle. That squared set convention would apply to that in a circle motion, because you're defining 2 defined couples to do an action as if they were head couples or side couples.
Yeah,
So
I've never
turn
thought
the circle into a square.
I've never thought that they suddenly I never thought that anybody goes into the middle. A squared set doesn't have anybody in the middle. It's got people at squared sets, but so if you're, you know, circle to the, you know, heads are all the way circle left and all the boys, just saying all the boys doesn't do anything except kind of put them on alert.
No, I
say boys move to the middle and back.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Alan, but I think the idea was you started off with saying if you're in a circle and you define 4 dancers like boys or heads, do they automatically go into the middle? And that's what establishes that squared set type of action. That was just the question of, is it automatic? Because I think back when you started, you said you thought it was an automatic thing, but it's not. Is that about correct?
Yeah, that's true in a way. But I most of the choreography that guys use, where they put the same sex together, is so they can have the boys square through or the boys pass through and do something. And so they are actually forming a grid. They're forming the grid. The other couples are expected to face in if they're not already facing in, while the boys are doing whatever you've directed them to do. So, and you expect them to meet that other couple, and so you are working on the grid.
Just from a timing and delivery standpoint, I've never thought that just saying, you know, circle left, head square through 4 is fair. I would always say, you know, head square through 4, and I mean circle left, and it probably wouldn't be heads, it'd probably be boys or something. But I, you know, I'd say whoever it is that I'm picking, move to the middle and back.
Yep.
And that not because I care about them going into the middle or back so much, or you know, because they are coming back. But it's just to give, you know, just saying circle left, blah, blah, blah. Okay, boys. And I that's not enough. Boys move to the middle and back. Everybody's on full alert.
Yeah,
that
but
we're
Chris,
making squared.
what that does is even before Collar Lab, even before any formalization of square dancing, that was one of the conventions and rules that was trying to be written because it's a uniquely American activity. And I hope you guys all take this as the tongue-in-cheek joke it's intended as. That's called the common sense and logic rule, and it hasn't really applied to the Americans for very long. Sorry, I had to take it. Al or Brian.
Yeah, I was just going to say I have a lot of fun working with same sexes, and I know it's not entirely legal in the basic and mainstream program, but I'll have a set like head couples half sachet, everybody circle to the left, and then just the boys up to the middle and back, and just the boys do a right and left through. The boy turn the girl boy. Now boys flutter wheel, girl boy go in and pick up the boy and bring him back. Boys reverse the flutter wheel, boy go in and pick up the girl boy and bring him back. Everybody circle to the left, and then you do the same thing with the girls. Girls up to the middle and back. Girls do a right and left through. The boy girl turn the girl. Girls flutter wheel, girl go and pick up the boy girl and bring her back, etc. You know, and it just sort of creates a smile on the dancers' faces, and the whole thing just works out as a zero because you're doing a right and left through, a flutter wheel and a reverse flutter wheel, so they end up back where they started anyhow.
I thought you were going to say it all ended up in a mess, Brian.
Well, I've never had it end up in a mess. I usually do it from lines. I usually get lines where I've got the girls in the middle of the line and the boys on the end of the line, and then I'll start with say the girls, and I'll get the girls to do the right and left through and do that with them, and then everybody up to the middle and back and bend the line. Now just the boys do a right and left through, the boy turn the girl boy, and that sort of thing. And then
you know what, Brian? There would be an argument. There would be an argument there that says, and let me get this all up. Right and left through is defined at that level that you cannot do it that way. But
that's right. Well, that's what I said at the beginning.
But hang on. But what you just said, you can do it that way, and that is defined in the rules and guidelines about extended additional choreography or variations of choreography because you met the rest of the rules and conditions that allow you to bypass that. And this just goes back to where Chris was talking about sometimes these rules and things are in conflict with each other. No, that's not in conflict. Right and left through has it defined, but it also says for variations, which includes things like gimmicks. If you require the qualifiers, you do that. That's in the rules and guidelines. It's perfectly legal to do it if you follow that. It would be wrong to just say 4 girls right and left through, or, you know, to do that. But if you're doing it as a qualification,
never had any issues with the dancers not doing it
and
properly.
you wouldn't.
Never.
You generally wouldn't, because it's a fun gimmick, and it's taken
absolutely, yeah.
Then you want to have the boy and the boy and the girl boy make a right-hand star, right?
Yes, you could do that.
I think, Brian, I'm going to write you up and send you to the square dance police. I've
seen that. That was actually that thing you're saying. That was in a book I read one time, and it's actually a very old dance. It's called Oh Boy. Be here all week.
Have you ever called it for the gay club, Brian?
I've never been invited to call for a gay. I'm waiting for an invitation to call for a gay club because, you know, I've got these U-Butte calls that I want to do, you know, weave the ring, don't touch a thing, you know, and things like that.
Boy, are we deteriorating.
Speaking of gay clubs, one of the best pieces of advice I got as a caller was actually when I was calling for La Date Carré in Ottawa. And it was my first time to call for a gay and lesbian square dance club. And I wasn't sure what to say with 4 ladies chain and all that. And I was told basically in no simple terms, and very politely when I asked the question, it says, 1, I can't believe you asked that because we know who we're dancing as, a boy or a girl. We dance the boys or the girls position. We decide, not you. The movement's called for ladies chain, call for ladies chain, and pull your head out of, you know, where it is. Call a dance. We're here to have fun. Call it. And that was the best piece of advice I was ever given because it took all that stress away from me to say, you know, you're there to call the dance. They don't change it when they go to dance at a convention. They don't change it when people come to dance at their clubs. if they are going to make a change, they'll tell you, we call the boys larks and the girls ravens or whatever. Just call and have fun. And that was the whole essence of it.
Yeah,
It was the best advice I ever got.
And
Yeah.
that's true for modern Western,
Yep.
but not for gender-free contra dancing.
Interestingly enough, I was, many years ago, I was dating a woman between my marriages who was a strong feminist and insisted that I don't say boys and girls, but men and women. And I'm working on coming back to that, to boys and girls, partly because Taminations doesn't always recognize men and women. But I was talking to a good friend of mine who happens to be a caller, who happens to be a lesbian woman, yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we were discussing this very point. And she said they've come to the point of, and we all should, I think, is that boys and girls is the name, instead of bows and bells, it's the name of a particular dancer, relative to where you started. And you just live with the boys and girls, which is what Brian just said which is what Mel just said to Brian. Boys and girls is a square dance term. Men and women is a more of a directed at genders and can be descriptive. We also discussed, one second, Dan, whatever you do, don't say men and girls. Don't mix your things. Boys and girls go together, men and women go together, ladies and gentlemen go together. Stay within whatever pair you're in. But square dance wise, go with boys and girls if that's what it wants, because that's what the dancers seem to understand, whether they were born that way or not. Dan, what were you going to say?
I was going to say I haven't had an amusing time a few weeks ago before we shut down again, when I only had 4 dancers show up for the Thursday night thing. And so I was doing 2 couple stuff, but I needed to demonstrate wheel and deal. So I had to use okay, those dancers who were assigned at male at birth, you turn back.
and that can get you into trouble too. My granddaughter is trans, and
Yeah,
I'm not sure she'd know how to take that either. So,
Got a question for you. Mike Gormley posted this when we were talking about what you do on this circle to align and slide. If I called heads lead to the right, circle to align, and roll, who rolls?
Why?
That's something.
No,
that's-
it's not a matter of why, and I would never call that. I'm just curious.
So that's the kind of
Hand
thing.
dancer only.
Yeah, just that last person on the end, the one who, the only one who did the turn. They did the turn.
That's correct. And
Yeah.
but the reason I brought that up, I was just curious about it because I saw this initially in Colorama, which does it like that. So I just plugged it into Taminations. And this is what I got. There's the lead to the right. There's the circle to align. And there's the roll.
Well, this is why you don't rely on computer programs.
I know.
I'm constantly harping on new callers that you should be able to know what the computer is already going to do before it's like you have to be able to know what the answer is before the computer does it. You can't ask.
I agree wholeheartedly, Chris.
Yeah.
But this is one of the dangers that we did a session on, and it's a session, especially for mentors, why you should never encourage new callers to use a caller program before they know how to use their checkers, especially for writing choreography.
I think we should get the what's the name of the guy that does Taminations again?
Brad
Christie.
Brad Christie.
We should get him to make sure to leave this bug in, because if he fixes it, it's going to enable the program to the kind of choreography that people call with this program and the capabilities that this program has are not that end roll there thing is not appropriate for the kind of things this program can do in general, and for the kind of people who use that program. So I think we should make sure to get him to leave that bug in, so that when we're delivering that lecture, now when it is the computer, we can bring up terminations and have it get the wrong answer.
Yeah, there are a lot of those contaminations which are hilarious. Things that you would call normally that you have to do the fudge. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you have to do the fudge and put in 3 different calls, or an A2 and an A1 and a basic call to make the mainstream call variation that you're trying to get.
Well, termination also just does some kind of wacky things there's another one. I don't want to impugn it by name because I can't keep all the names straight, but there's another very popular calling program that does even crazier things and gets a lot of stuff wrong. But there are bugs that can be fixed, and he fixes bugs quick, and is striving for a very high quality program, which it is. But I think we should get him to leave that one in on purpose, just so we can point to it. You can put it in the documentation.
Clark, you were about to talk about
couldn't resist that one.
Gender-free contras. How do they handle the bells, boys, whatever?
They explicitly don't want to keep boys and girls. And boy, I haven't been to one in so long now. I mean, larks and ravens, they always have a pair of terms that are like that. And they use them. And they also, they have bear arms and armbands. That's it. And they give out these armbands that are, sometimes they're just really lightweight plastic that you tie on, like fluorescent orange, tape to mark a dangerous situation. And anyone can choose to be whichever role they want whenever they want, but you can tell by looking at the dancers whether you have an armband or not. And bears and bands is what you might say for that, at least at the dance I go to. Chris Ricciotti in our area is the guy who has promulgated this. But it's interesting that they definitely don't like and want traditional gendered calling with boys and girls or men and women or whatever.
Yeah. What I find interesting about that, Clark, is that all the articles I've read on gender-free dancing, especially gender-free contras, I'm actually just looking at one right now, and what it says is, while it's generally so your dancer's role says nothing about your gender, it doesn't change the fact that gents and ladies are inherent terms. It's not a case of semantics, and it doesn't change the roles of the guys or the girls, just the term of guys and girls, because some members of the community find gents and ladies to be awkward, exclusionary, or even hurtful. It doesn't change who's dancing the boys' part, who's dancing the girls' part. All you've done is change the terminology to mean lark means boy or left-hand dancer, raven means girl or right-hand dancer, and you dance them at the boys' part or the girls' part. The same as you can call star through. A boy's part is danced, the lady's part is danced by the raven, the boy's part is danced by the lark.
Well,
that's the difference in it.
So sometimes I've done fun nights where the gender balance was way off. So it's, for example, almost all girls, probably little girls, and very few or no boys. And so the first time that happened, because I wasn't expecting that to happen, when I walked in, I was like, uh-oh, I better think of something. And so I was like, okay, they're rustlers and cowbells. And they don't know boy, girl. They don't have any preconceived notion of this is a boy part of a call or anything. So I just made up those random terms and used those. They were fine.
I just realized that larks and ravens start with an L for left and an R for right. I that never clicked until just now. But
where I've found confusion of that is people look at a raven is usually considered a masculine bird and a lark is usually considered a female songbird. And they get them confused all the time.
I want to throw in an interesting anecdote relative to boys and girls, men and women, etc. Many years ago, when I was strongly into men and women versus girls and boys, when I would do something like a weave the ring, and when you meet swing and promenade, and I'd say when you meet that person, because the boys would meet a girl or the men would meet a woman and the woman would meet a man, so I'd say meet that person. It seemed to be fair to everybody. And during one of the breaks, I was walking around talking to people, and some woman stood up very outraged. You've heard this one, Chris. And I thought she was going to complain about, she's a girl. She said, I'm a woman. I'm a girl. But I'm not a person. Oh, really? I thought everybody was. Anyway, you can't win for trying.
We had a caller here in Australia that was over in America, and I think I might have told this story once before. He was telling me that, how the caller will say, pass through and swing mother and promenade home. Well, he was doing this sort of thing, and then he said, pass through, and then he realized that the lady that he was about to have the men swing with wasn't their original partner. So he made the mistake of saying, pass through and swing that mother, then promenade.
Ooh, yeah, that could be taken wrong in some places.
Which wasn't very good. Yeah.
The time I got it. Go ahead, Brian. Finish your.
We don't use that term over here. Like we don't use that mother whatever here in Australia. So it didn't have the same meaning to him that it had to all of the American dancers.
As Sammy Davis Jr. would put it, he said half a word, didn't he?
One of the biggest slips I had trying to be politically correct was I was doing, I guess it was patter, but I just wasn't thinking and just went into the usual routine of the four little ladies chain across. And then I realized little ladies wasn't very politically correct. So I said, you big ones go too. And at the end of the tip, they were lined up at the stage. It was too late to retract that one. Helen, you were going to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think I wrote in the column in the comments also that I learned to dance as a left-hand dancer because there were so few men learning to dance. But what you realize as a woman when you're dancing, that you're actually calling to the men, because you tell the men to swing your partner, or you're always talking to the men. And I think that this is something I've been trying to sort of find ways of making it more equal. Why do you always say, come back, swing your, well, like your lady or whatever, where she's going to swing her man as well? So it's I think, something that the women dancers think of, and I especially maybe thought of it as I was dancing, a left-hand dancer. It kind of hit home to me. For example, we often dance circle left, allemand left. Well, that's not very comfortable for the women. So I quite often call circle right, allemand left, just to make the men turn around. And I think that's natural because it's been men being callers most of the time, and they've maybe sort of dance it themselves and find out what's comfortable for the men. So we have a long way to go to make it actual, being even. And I can also say that I think maybe here in Sweden, it's even more important. We get callers coming here to Sweden who haven't come as far as the Swedes in sort of equality between men and women. And all their words, they don't think of what they're saying, but they're not, they don't get received very well here in Sweden because we are very conscious of the equality between.
Yeah. Well, you guys actually start that right in preschool. I think it's age 5. There was an article written, I think, Loki, on child psychology and everything else about gender neutrality in preschools and things like that in Sweden. They're very progressive. They don't even have gender-based dolls in school.
Helen, I'm glad you're Helen, I'm glad you're at least trying to worry about that kind of thing. As I said, weave the ring and swing some, swinging.
Well, swing your partner. Swing your partner. Swing your original partner, or swing your partner at the moment, or swing your corner, or whatever you have to swing. But you let the women swim someone just as well as you let the men swing someone once in a while, anyway.
You can swing your honey.
In 1970.
Oh, your honey, maybe. Is your honey a man as well?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. That's
in
fine.
1970, I was at a caller school in Colorado with 4 very prominent national callers on the staff, and one of the students said, had the dancers in one of his tips circle to the right and do an Alaman left. And the instructor said, wait, that's very difficult for the guys to backtrack. And I couldn't keep my mouth shut. And I said, just like the women every other time. And
oh, you radical you.
Actually, circling right, Alaman left is still not as easy for the women as circle left, Alaman left is for the men, because the men have their left hands in the direction of the Alaman left, whereas the women have to change hands. They've got their right hands, whether they're circling left or right. They still have to change hands. Circling right is better for the women, but it's still not as good as circling left for the men.
It's a bit like star through and veer to the left. The ladies seem to accept that. I mean, I don't call it because I don't think it's a good move, but you call star through and veer to the right, and the men will complain like hell, but the ladies don't complain if you say star through and veer to the left.
Well, Brian, I was curious about that once, and I danced the man's part and the lady's part on the star through and veer to the left. And I found when a caller says it, and I'll call it now and then, I try and stay away from it. But when you stack the calls enough, the ladies know to rock over and rock back, just like they do in round dancing, I agree it's part of dancing. But yeah,
the same thing is walk and dodge partner trade. It's the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A lot of it, that also comes down into delivery timing, command timing and delivery timing to allow for the proper execution timing.
Kudos to the women who can adjust better than the men can.
The same as square through, star through. For the man, it's fine, but for the lady, you're using the wrong hand. You don't have the correct hand free.
I love to do that, Brian, when I've got 4 women in the middle and say square through 3 to a star through. It flows very nicely.
I find that the star through veer to the left works best if you follow it with sweep a quarter.
Really?
That's fine, Chris, but that's only a challenge.
Yeah, if you're going to break them down, you might as well break them down into little pieces.
One of the interesting things, Helen, you were saying about circle left to an Alaman left. I know when I started, I thought that arm sway when you're dancing was part of circle to left. That's what you did. And the timing, and I admit I was very lucky because an Alaman left off a circle left is very comfortable because it's called here and the arm is coming back and you're turning towards your corner, and to swing your partner, you're turning towards your partner to the swing. Very comfortable. But when I learned that circle left is hands, turn, and walk, it's not comfortable. That was just part of the styling that made that circle left. And in the traditional dances that you see, a circle left has those big swings, and this is why you have the 8-beat swings and the 8-beat Alamans and everything's on those 8-beat phrases, because it is very, very comfortable to do with that flourish. It wasn't all the twists and turns. The flourish was in how you moved. So
contra dancing is definitely one of these places where there's no styling recommended, and the reason they can get away with 8-beat phrases to a lot of calls that we think are only 6 or 4.5 or what have you, is because they've learned to listen to the music. And if there's a little extra time at the end of the phrase, they'll rock back and balance back and forth or swing or something, and they'll swing till the phrase is done. The dancers have learned to listen and appreciate the music and dance to it instead of fighting with it. But
I think today's modern square dancers could, square dance callers could learn a lot by attending contra dances, by listening to contra music or to listening to traditional music, because it's very rhythm, beat, and action dependent to the phrase. And it so helps with the timing and watching the timing and delivery about what dancers do, because they automatically learn and take the time to learn to move with the music. And we unfortunately don't spend a lot of time teaching dancers to move to the music, sacrificing that to let's get as much choreography we can get down their throats as fast as possible.
let's hear it for choreography. Alan, were you going to say something?
I was just going to chime in with the circling. Certainly circle, we wouldn't call star right from a circle left normally, because you're walking in that direction. So if you're going to do a left-hand star, you need to circle right.
Oh yeah, okay.
Right, so
I'm with you.
And so you just naturally balance those two out. The thing I wanted to test guys on was we call double pass through, first couple go left, next couple go right. And I've always thought of, if we're going to basic the calls, that we need a call that's called wheel left or wheel right. Because basically that's what a wheel and deal is. One side of the line is wheeling left and the other side of the line is wheeling right. And my idea of the wheel call is that it relocates off the center line or back onto the center line. So if you do a double pass through and the first couple wheel left and the next couple wheel right, no different to what we're doing now, but it just formalizes it as a standard call sort of thing. So then you can start using that in other ways where you might, from a box, pass through and everybody wheel left and couples circulate, or, that sort of thing leads to more flowing choreography.
A lot of the problem with making up a call like that is that a lot of the choreography, the way that it flows the best is if they're actually wheeling towards the same direction, but a different person is doing the pivot, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, but let's face it, when you say first couple go left, it's the old folk call, if you like. And really what I'm doing is just formalizing that a wheel is 180-degree relocation of the couple either to the left or to the right.
There's a thing in the back of my head that's going off, which is the name of an old call, but I've actually forgotten what it means. Somebody here will know, and it might be relevant to the discussion. And the call was wheel across.
Was that a couples trade?
That was just the as couples California twirl or as couples trade.
Alan, it seems to me if we went with your concept, we should have a wheel in and a wheel out. The wheel out is the first go left and the next go right, and the wheel in is wheeling back in the wheel and deal. Of course, you've got to specify which goes first, but
yeah, the thing is, wheel will have two different definitions though, because you've got wheel around, which is a central pivot. You've got a wheel and deal, which is a forward and away action. I know exactly where you're coming from there. First couple left, next couple right was a directional prompt, same that is adapted into a movement, and that's great. It's the same as first couple right, next couple left, which is a great variation of it.
One of the
yeah,
things
it is a wheel family movement. You're right.
One of the things that it does facilitate, but is easy teaching of wheel and deal, because you're able to talk in terms of wheeling left and wheeling right. So it's bringing it back to a fundamental like lead left and lead right, veer left, veer right, as a basic type action that square dancers use. But, I'm trying to rewrite history, of course, and that's not going to happen. But certainly it's not going to change anything, but I think it just maybe rationalizes it a bit more for the dancers. Can I just comment earlier where they were talking about star through? We had a call swing star through, didn't we? Which was a swing through and then a star through. How awkward could that be where you're reaching across you've done the swing through and then you're reaching across to do the star through.
It wasn't awkward because you would anticipate it. That's why it had a name.
The same with
As
grand
the
spin
centers are
has the same
trading,
action.
they're Ready, getting the centers are trading by their left hand. It's a guy. Let's say you start from, you know, a right hand ocean wave with boys on the ends. You swing half. As the boys are trading by the left, they have their right hand available. The girl standing there, she has her left hand available, and then you can do the star through, and you end facing out. And then it's often swing star twirl. You put the California twirl on the end of it.
Yeah.
And that's where the definition adds to the anticipation of the call, the same as in grand kernel, or sorry, the grand spin, spin the top 3/4 girl move up and star through. The anticipation of that action is written into the definition, which is why it's comfortable to do. But then in stop time, it would be horrible.
Is that still on?
Surprisingly, Alan, it was pretty smooth, surprisingly. Hey, we've been talking about rules, and I've got one. A personal rule is don't sit on these Zoom sessions for 7 hours. So I have enjoyed it. I want to thank all of you guys.
I thought we were going to stay here until it was time for Mel to start again.
I think you guys are, but I personally have to bow out.
No, I'm going to bed for a few Zeds.
Yeah, well,
not to kill the vibe, guys.
If you think this one was a bit controversial, I'm going to be talking about the SSD program in mind, so that I expect to be very controversial because I'm going to be very blunt.
Mel, will you put my apologies in the morning, please?
Certainly.
Come back next week here. I think we're working on something controversial also.
Thank you, Mel.
Be revealed
Thanks
later.
very much. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
And just as a
Thank
reminder,
you very much.
all the documentation is available on Flutterby with Dan. I think Mark is probably going to be posting it up on his as well. Most of the definitions and everything else you can get off the Color Lab knowledge base. Just make sure you get the current ones, because if you just do a Google search, you can get old ones, new ones. Always try and get the latest version.
Thanks very much.
Cheers now.
Bye all.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Mel, I may be a little late for your presentation. I have a meeting to go to and I'm carpooling, so, but I will be there.
Oh, Yolanda, by the way, did you get my email?
No.
Okay. I replied to you from the last time you sent me something. I wrote you back a reply.
Okay.
And but it was a day when you had a bunch of crazy things going on, and I thought you might.
My normal.
Yeah. Well, anyway, go look for it. It should be there, but if it's not,
Okay.
just drop me a note and I'll send you another copy.
Okay, I will do that.
Yep.
Yeah. I
Catch
think
you all
people have
later.
learned that my life is not always scheduled.
Yeah, I understand. Totally understand. Hey, Mel, thanks. And is that Dan over there still?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
Still
Yeah.
here.
I had no idea there was so much to talk about a pass through.
It is one of those that is always, and this is what I actually like about challenges, because they claim they dance the definitions and they follow the rules technically, but that is the classic example of where they do not, because it's not written down, and it does need to be written down. And believe me, Chris, I'm not in disagreement with you. I understand the logic, and most callers will call and the dancers will know what to do by the next call. But with a stop, what do? They violate the definition. And that's because it's not clarified.
Yeah, I would just say that you and I are interpreting the definitions differently. Because I'm looking at the exact same ones that I'm getting a different answer.
Well, I look at the definition that says a pass through from a static square, you end up on the outside in the footprint of the static square. That's
not all it says.
Sorry?
That's not all it says.
No, hang on. Well, I'll pull it up here. We got it.
I feel like
we're
we're getting. I should not have opened my mouth.
Hang on.
You just read it to me a few minutes ago.
Hang on.
The problem is that there's 3 or 4 different rules, and when you put them together, you can get different answers.
Hang on.
People have different perspectives.
One of the things that I find attractive about square dancing is that I'm a software developer. And
Okay.
square dancing is an awful lot like computer programming, which is to say that mostly it's very consistent and logical. And then there are these freaking edge cases that you just have to memorize.
It's more like it's less like, procedural programming and more like putting in rules in a constraint system.
Yeah, one of the things, like this is what the actual definition verbatim says. From a squared set, heads pass through is proper. It ends with the heads back on the squared set spots. See general conventions and rules, squared set convention. And when we go to squared set convention,
It says, yeah, that unless.
no, there's no unless. There's no word unless in there. That's black and white. It's
No, it says it depends on the next call.
no, it doesn't. That's part of dancing.
That's some other rule that it's in conflict with them.
There's no conflict in the rules. Okay,
The squared set rule says that they go to the outside unless they don't.
It says calls that are defined as starting from facing dancers or facing couples are also proper starting from a squared set. The caller must identify which is the active couple. We've got that. The active dancers move forward in the center of the set and execute the call. If they're facing the same walls as the inactive dancers, they remain in the center. If they are not facing the same walls as the inactive dancers, then the active dancers end up on the squared set spot unless there is a clear reason to remain in the center, and that's where it goes. So if they do a pass through, they are not facing the inactives. They are supposed to go out unless there is a clear reason for them to remain in the center. That clear reason would be the definition of the next call or the action of the next call. It's
right.
Very clear. There's no argument with that.
Right, but the action of the next call is
which is a clear reason for them to remain in the center. So
right,
at challenge, if I called heads pass through, they should be back out of the center.
No, because I'm going to call split circulate now.
No, if I just call heads pass through, there is no reason for them to remain in the center unless the next call requires them to. And that's what I was saying.
The next call requires them to not leave the center. It's split circulate.
Now, here's the question for you. If I call from a static square, heads partner tag, where would they be?
They'll be on, they won't have ever come in the middle.
Okay, if I call heads, do a U-turn back partner tag, where would they be?
Same place, doesn't matter.
If I call heads pass through, pause, partner tag, where would they be?
They'd be in the middle facing the sides.
No, they wouldn't. If I call heads pass through and partner tag, they would be.
No, because the partner tag requires them to be in there.
No, the partner tag doesn't. If I call heads pass through,
well,
partner tag side square through. No, hear me out, Chris. You've got to work with this. If I call heads pass through, partner tag side square through 4, that's correct. That would break down a challenge floor because of the way it is. What we're talking about is a convention.
It's
timing.
The rule doesn't cover. It's because the rule is written wrong. The rule doesn't.
The rule is not written wrong. What it says
the rule says except for the next call, which is to say,
no, it says unless
something that we cannot predict is
unless there is a clear reason for them to stay in the center.
Yeah, the clear reason is that I said partner tag touch a quarter.
So heads pass through.
Partner tag touch a quarter.
Hang on. How about this? Heads pass through side square through 4. That is proper.
Yeah. I would say that it's proper because it's not defined and everybody knows to get the hell out of the way.
That's right.
Although what I actually call every time for that is
heads pass through, split circulate.
Take a step ahead, sides come in and whatever.
Yeah, I understand that. What I'm not arguing about how it's danced.
That's the way I call it at all levels.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. What I'm saying is the rule itself is very black and white defined. How it's being applied at that level needs to sorry, it doesn't need to, it should have the qualification that at challenge, there's an expectation to remain in the middle unless the next call has you going out. And that should be written at every level. That's all it was.
Yeah, it has to be, it's still going to be a very weaselly thing, because it's going to be at challenge, we tend to mostly kind of do this, and otherwise you mostly kind of do that. But
and it's an example of that. Like the rule itself is very clearly defined. There's no argument with it. How it's being danced.
You keep saying that, but it doesn't make it true.
Well, okay, where is it unclear?
The fact that you and I are reading the same thing
No, no.
getting a different answer means that it's
I'm
not
asking.
clear.
I'm asking about the words themselves. Where is that itself unclear? It says in a squared set convention.
Unless the next call, unless the action of the next call requires it. That's what's not clear.
Yeah, it also goes in. Some callers want the active dancers to remain in the center, precede the call with a heads move in. It goes in that's where they would actually say that, which contradicts what you're saying at challenge. If they want them to stay in or stay in the center, those kinds of things. I'm not in disagreement. I'm just saying what it is.
There's no getting around the fact that the sentence, do this exactly precisely, unless undefined thing.
Sorry, I still have not found just do precisely. It says unless there is a clear reason to remain in the center.
I'm not looking at the text. I'm relying on you reading it to me, and I think that you read to me something that said something about the action of the next call.
No, that was when I was explaining what was meant by it.
So you agree that's the clear reason.
What I said was, if a call ends with the active dancers not facing the inactive, this is after a pass-through, and this is a squared set convention, the active dancers end back on the squared set spots unless there is a clear reason to remain in the center. And what I said was that means that unless there's a reason, such as the next call requires them to stay in the center or the next call requires them to move out in the center, that is what's going to dictate their action. And that's when I went into command timing and delivery timing.
So you and I are just disagreeing over the wording clear reason.
That's what I am actually saying, is that's where the clarification needs to be made on that, because even at basic heads pass through California twirl, they're not going to step. They're going to do what is on. Heads pass through, face your partner, pass through, swing the right hand lady. They're staying in the center. That's because the next call is a clear reason for them to remain in the center.
You know, the only possible way to fix this, actually, right, to make it so that it's just straightforward and ironclad and not subject to interpretation. The only way to fix it is to say that they always stay in the center unless the caller directs them to go outside. Or and you could add to that, except on the following, 4 calls at plus or something.
No, because in that case, what you're saying is exactly what is written there, only changing stay in the center as to go outside. What you're saying right there is heads always stay, or after the pass through, you always stay in the center unless the next call requires you to go out. What it says hang on.
What this one is saying is go in the middle, and then after that, maybe do something extra, but we're not going to tell you when. What I'm saying it should be is go in the middle, Chris, and stay there unless they tell you to leave. That's different.
What it says is you go out unless the next call requires you to stay in. You want to change it to stay in unless the next call requires you to go out. That's semantics.
It doesn't say requires, it says clear reason.
It says unless there is a clear reason. So what you want it to say is heads stay in the middle unless there's a clear reason, rather than what it says right now is heads go out unless there's a clear reason to stay in. You want to flip it around.
Yes, because my way works all the time, and this way only works half the time.
No, it doesn't work all the time.
Yes, when would it not work? If they have to stay in the middle unless you say go back out, that always works. If they sometimes go out and sometimes not, based on nobody can agree on what, then that doesn't work. That's why they're different.
Here's what you just said. So it always works if they stay in the middle unless they have to go out.
That's not what I said.
Those are your exact words.
No, unless the caller specifically directs them with another call to go out.
Yeah, the action of the next call.
No, not the action of the next call. A
So-
call. Go
So
out.
heads pass through, go out and cloverleaf?
Yes.
I would never call that. I'd call heads pass through.
That's exactly what we call it, challenge.
Yeah, I would call heads pass through cloverleaf because that's defined. Heads pass through California twirl, that's defined.
At challenge, heads pass through and cloverleaf is called, but it's actually sloppy. What we really call is heads pass through. By what I mean by sloppy, well, I don't want to go down another rat hole, but it's a little bit in the vein of pass to the center and pass through and the notion of active dancers. It's that kind of, it's not the same thing, but it's that kind of implied sloppiness. But what we really say is heads pass through, step ahead and clover. That's what we really say. But you will find people who will just say heads pass through and clover, and they're being a little bit sloppy, and since everybody knows what that means, it's okay. But yeah,
I understand it, and this is why I'm saying that's more of a convention rather than a rule.
But it's not, yeah, but that's what I'm saying, that's sloppy. Formally what we do is they always stay in there unless we say go out. There's various words that go out, but they are actual calls. And if we don't like the words that they use at challenge, and I could understand why not, we would just make up another word, like step ahead. We would put that in the official vocabulary. And
it is already in the official vocabulary.
Oh, good. Then we don't need to. Then we don't need to do it. But the thing is,
what it's there for.
What I'm saying is, the rule is that you do a thing and you don't do anything extra. If the guy wants you to leave, then he should give you a call. Leave. In other words, step ahead. But it's not just because the next call might. That's just too fudgy, and that's the problem with the way it is now. Is it's fudgy.
Yeah. So if I called heads pass through partner tag around 2 to a line, that would break down a challenge floor, but a basic 4 could do that very easily.
Right, because it's a fudgy.
Well, not partner tag anymore, but
well, yeah, I know what you mean. Because it's a fudgy thing, and half the people are going to think one thing, and half the people.
But it doesn't get fudgy until you get to challenge.
No, I think it's fudgy there.
I used to call that at basic when partner tag was on the program. Never had a problem with it. Dancers never had a problem with it.
Well, I've never really had a problem with any of this, and I call all the levels. So
yeah,
it's a little hypothetical but I mean the anecdotes of who has trouble with what on a given.
And that's
whatever. It's not,
and that's predictive to callers and clubs and dancers and everything else. I agree with that part.
Yeah, that's just going to be. But I mean, algorithmically, the only possible answer is you only do what the caller says. You don't add extra shit.
Yeah, and pass through. This is why I was said pass through has a definition. What you're saying doesn't contradict the definition at all, the way it stands. What you are saying, however, is at the challenge level, that clarification is needed, or it should be clarified that at all levels it has one definition because it applies through. Maybe reversing that order would be a better call. And that's something for the definitions committee to decide. Right now, the way it's written, it doesn't contravene any of the definitions. Both of them support, because that, as you say, fudgy text of unless there's a clear reason. Well, unless there is a clear reason is depending on what the action of the next call is the reason to stay in the middle. And that could mean 100 things.
And since the answers don't know what the action of the next call is until they hear it, it's a little bit late, isn't it?
But that's when you get down into the other rules about timing, call timing, and delivery timing and execution timing, because they should know what the next call is before they finish that pass through.
Well, that's not always practical.
I know, but that is the reality of it.
No, that's not the reality of it. That's the fantasy of it.
No, I'm talking about the reality of the rule, the way it's written. If people followed the rules, life would be ideal. But unfortunately, there's also the human factor that goes into people.
Right. That's why I'm referring to it as fantasy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, my goal with this rules and definitions and in these guidelines, and I don't know why I'm the one that keeps getting asked to present it, but maybe it's because I can take 600 pages of documents and put them into a text. But it's something that always comes up. It has always created controversial discussion. It's always created discussion and argument. But the benefit is it gets people talking at it and looking at them, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I liked your presentation. I really enjoyed the whole thing.
Now, I was actually expecting, and that wasn't the one that I was anticipating. It was the circulate rule, because that was the one that always comes up. What do you mean the ocean wave rule and doesn't apply to circulates? Well, no, you can circulate from an ocean wave, but the ocean wave rule does not apply.
Right.
And this is one of the problem with, they should have called it the chocolate chip rule and had a completely different meaning.
By the way, I thought I saw around that time a diagram of, a square that had the ends were like in lines facing, right? And in the middle was an ocean wave. So like heads face your partner, sides face your partner, heads pass the ocean and lock it, or heads step to the wave.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
You had one in a mini wave and the other is facing couples.
Right. Yeah. And so I wouldn't buy if somebody called all 8 circulate or split circulate or anything. I wouldn't buy that.
No, and that's very clear. The rule would not apply to that setup.
Okay.
What that would be the circulate rule, and the circulate rule doesn't apply because the circulate rule doesn't apply to either the ocean wave rule or the facing couple rule. It does not apply to those, and that's very clear. But the ocean wave rule does apply.
Right. Well, wait a minute, the ocean wave rule again. Which one's which?
Okay, so if I have my orientation, let's just put 2 couples facing head walls. Okay, so I've got the number 1 man and his opposite are in a mini wave, and the number 1 lady and the number 3 man are facing couples.
So
are facing dancers, I should say. So I've got a mini wave and facing dance. I got a letter T. Okay, I can call a swing through from there. I can call a spin the top from there. I can call a right and left through from there. The ocean wave and the facing couple rule applies to that setup.
Right.
If I have exactly the same thing, but I've got that in parallel setups,
or even if you don't,
the circulate rule does not apply to either of those formations.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I agree with that. It went by quickly enough that I was like, did he say that was okay or not? Because I don't think it's okay.
It's not. And this is what the argument is, because when you say, well, you've got ocean waves or you got facing couples, the circulate rule does not apply. And there's always that argument, oh, well, you can circulate from facing couples. It's just a pass through. You can circulate from ocean waves. It's clearly defined. I says, yes, it is. That's not what the rule is about.
Right.
And it's like the ocean wave and the facing couples rule. That's why I refer to them as the opposite name rules. The facing couple rule applies to ocean waves. The ocean wave rule applies to facing couples.
Right. Yeah. Well, anyway, the next time you do that part of that presentation, I would go over that example a little more slowly, because it went by me fast enough that when it was over, I wasn't sure what you had said for that one example.
Yeah, I did begin to go a bit faster there because the discussion prior to that, because the presentation itself takes 40 minutes, but we had about 20 minutes of discussion in there before which is great. I love it when it's interactive, but it's that's why I had to say, okay, I wrote pass through on my sheet here. I said, we're gonna have to bypass that right now and come back to that at the end.
Yeah.
And
of course you're getting this from the guy that's always interrupting you.
No, I don't mind that at all. I like it when it's hard, because when I'm doing the presentation, I've got my PowerPoint on one screen, I've got my notes on the other screen. I can't see anybody there. That's why I asked Dan to watch it. And I just get a little note pop up if something gets put in the chat. So I have a quick look at that.
Yeah.
So somebody raises their hand, I can't see them.
I don't understand, Mel. I kept interrupting you and your presentation didn't time out. What's wrong?
But it is one, and that's actually why I put it into a more formal presentation and I made it available, because It's something that needs to be presented at caller schools. It needs to be presented to callers workshops. It's something that needs to go to callers so that there is a formal written presentation with links to all the documents. Here, take this. And at least even if you don't read it, at least you can understand the basic gist of what these rules and conventions mean.
Yeah, I liked it. It was a little bit like that talk that I did, only I was using kind of more, I think I was mostly using more obscure examples, more obscure cases.
Yeah, and I tried to keep it down at basic and mainstream because it is geared for newer callers, but like we only had 3 newer callers in the session today.
But mine you may recall was triggered by somebody at one of these things saying, probably one of your things, but I don't remember for sure, saying, hey, maybe I can call the following thing. And I was like, oh God, no. Maybe you can call it a challenge. And I'm like, oh God, no.
that was John. I think I remember. I can't remember the exact choreography, but I think that was John.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah.
He does that. He started on about 2.5 years ago, actually, or 2 years ago, when I was doing some of these things. And he would send me these emails, and some of them would be like an email change on one sequence of choreography, trying to explain nuance by nuance why you can, what you can't, what's the hand is. Well, this can do this. Well, you can do this. This is just facing couples. Yes, but you've got to consider body flow and all that, which is great.
The particular thing he wanted to do was a nice creative kind of, I mean, it wasn't like he was I mean, it wasn't stupid or anything. It was
no, it's not. He's written some really, really amazing choreography.
Yeah.
And he's also written some real crap choreography, but he doesn't quite understand why this works and why that doesn't. Right. But then again, he's not calling. He's only interested in calling for the nuances and the challenge of learning and understanding it. And hopefully, you'll actually start doing it one of these days.
Well, anyway, I'm looking forward to tonight.
Oh, the SSD one. I'm actually looking forward to that because, as I said, I'm not a proponent or an opponent of SSD. I've had long discussions, like when Jerry was still with us, I had a few discussions with him about it. I had discussions with him on symmetry, what is symmetry and what's not symmetry, as opposed to left and right variants or mirror images is not necessarily symmetry in the true context, but it's variety, standard applications, and the SSD program, what it's supposed to be and not supposed to be.
Which is why when
I was very pleased when he came on and gave that presentation of what it's not.
Yeah, when we're talking to new callers, I don't like to tell them, I don't like to use the word symmetry when suggesting that they just call all the material they know left-handed.
Yeah.
I think that confuses them.
Yeah, that's mirroring.
Yeah.
It is symmetric. It's a symmetrical version of that sequence.
Right, but yeah.
But it's not symmetry because we teach symmetry right from the beginning of symmetry. When you divide that square in half, what one half does, the other half does. That's the symmetrical aspect. There's heads, there's sides, 2 couples is 2 couples, no matter where you look at it.
Yeah.
But, and adding a new definition to symmetry is like adding a new definition to recycle at advanced, or at A2.
By the way, the way that
I think is wrong.
Well, it's not a new definition. It's just I
understand how it evolved, but they should have picked a different name for it.
Well, it's it's not that so it's hard to say. I mean, it's a structural problem with the definitions, right? I'll give you a very similar example. One that is less obvious, but is to me the same problem, is the definition of box counter rotate on the advanced list. You know that call, right? Do you?
No, I only call up to A1 actually. I don't call it. I don't call or dance A2.
I'll teach you the call. It's very simple. It sounds complicated.
I was just going to say, if you give me a second, I'm going to pull it up so I can see what's happening, and then I can follow you.
All it is you're taking a formation where people are facing not towards the middle, but any other direction other than straight away or straight towards, right? So they're, so they have their shoulder into the center of the formation. and it could be a box, or it could be the whole square, or it could be anything. But let's take a box. And so just like a regular touch a quarter right hand box or something. And all you're going to do is just turn the box, right? That's all you're going to do. It's like if you went in the middle, if you got another person to go stand in the middle of the box and hold on to the people, stick your arms out and hold on to the people, and then just rotate your body and bring them around the corner as a unit. That's all it's doing. It's just turning the formation around one quarter. That's all it is. And for some reason, that's very hard.
I did a heads touch a quarter, box counter rotate.
Yeah. So let's say you're the head boy. So you did your touch a quarter, and you're now facing the.
Can you see this?
Oh, right. We have computers. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so there's the heads touch a quarter.
Right, and now have the heads.
I'm just going to slow this down a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so box counter rotate. This freaked me out because I look at where everybody is.
Oh no! Don't do that. No.
No, what the hell?
Yeah, no, that's not right.
Okay.
Do centers box counter rotate.
Okay. That would be interesting to call it an A2 heads touch a quarter. Everybody.
Yeah, they won't. They can't do that at A2 because they don't know. Well, I'll tell you in a minute. So, I mean, see, this is all it is, right? It's nothing. We're just taking the formation and turning it one quarter around the corner, right?
Yeah.
So, like if I was standing in the middle there, in the middle of that box, and I stuck my arm out like a turnstile between the noses of those two dancers.
It's like a wheel hinge.
Exactly. And then we just turn a quarter. That's it. That's all. Or
heads touch a quarter, and as a couple sweep a quarter in the mini
wave. It's kind of sort of, except it's not a flow direction thing, but you understand what it is.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it from other formations with more people, then it's hard. You know what it's like? The exact analogy is, so you wouldn't do that because that's
idiotic.
Well, no, it's it's a little idiotic, but more than that, it's ridiculously hard because dancers below some challenge level, I'm not sure what level, will not know how to do a counter rotate when you're facing each other, because the sides were facing each other out there. The better example is go ahead and square it back up here, and heads past the ocean and extend or something. Just get parallel or pair off and touch or whatever. Just make waves. I don't know why that's my cliche for making waves, but anyway. So from here, you could have the centers counter rotate, and you could have the ends counter rotate. And you it's just like all 8 circulate. The ends are working around the outside, the centers are staying in the middle.
Except it's a floppy hinge.
Right. And so that's considered hard. And so all 8 counter rotate that we just did is on C1, and box counter rotate, just 4 people in box, that's on A2.
Yeah, well, they call that box counter rotate from there, which is A2.
And then you get a column from here. Yeah, if you call
from waves, if you call box counter rotate.
Well, you got to call. It's the same as circulate. You got to call split or all 8. Yeah.
Yeah, all 8.
Yeah. So call split counter rotate from here. And then you'll get a column because they'll do it. Each box will do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it actually looks more confusing when it's slowed down. But anyway.
No, I just did that so I could follow the actions. Like I said, I don't dance A2. I don't call A2.
Yeah.
And the only reason I started calling A1 was so that I could get hired at some of the festivals and whatnot, because it was mainstream plus A1, or mainstream plus an advanced, and you had to be able to call all 3 levels in order to call.
Right. So this counter rotate thing, as you can see, is a very general thing. And in fact, you could even do it with just, let's see. So for example, have the, let's see, I want those together. Oh, well, okay. Do it this way. Do a split circulate first, just because I want to get some people together. And then say girls hinge. So from here, now we're not going to do it, but you could see all 8 counter rotate would be the center box would counter rotate, and the outside people would counter rotate, where the inside girls are still going to stay on the inside when they come around the corner, and the outside girls. But you could take just the outside girls. I don't know if the program will do it, but you could take just the side girls and do a counter rotate from there. Right. See if it'll do side. See if it'll do side girls counter rotate. I don't know if it'll understand that, but it should. Did it do it? Oh yeah. See, it's a totally general thing. We could even just have those.
It's weird because you can't type side girls, but you can type side ladies, and it comes up as side girls.
Oh, weird. We get. How about women? How about people? Yeah. So you see, it's like this totally. It's a totally general thing. You only need you only need 2 people really to do it. And the only thing interesting about it is that you can't do it if you're like, if you had those side girls from roll or roll 3 times or whatever, so they're facing in or out. Then from there you cannot counter rotate. They can't counter rotate. You have to have a shoulder in towards the center, and then it only takes 2 people, but you could do 2 people, 4 people, 8 people, 6 people, however many you want. And so it's a totally general movement, and it's not really that hard, to understand what it is. The write-ups for it are kind of the wording of how to describe it is a
bit bizarre.
It's kind of hard to understand, and people think the call's real hard, but conceptually it's not really hard.
It's not. No, it's actually quite simple.
Yeah, it's the difference between split counter rotate and all 8 counter rotate is exactly the same difficulty as split circulate and all 8 circulate.
And circulate, yeah.
Yeah, same kind of deal. So, but advanced, you can only do box counter rotate. You can't do just the side girls counter rotate. You can't do all 8 counter rotate. You can't do, in your diamond counter rotate. You can't do any other counter rotates other than a box.
Those are the qualifiers that go into the definitions.
Right, but the thing is, what we have to do.
Are they written in there?
Yeah, it makes it, the way it's written, it's like a whole separate call. It doesn't reference all 8 counter rotate at all in that definition. It's like written up like a separate call. And this is and then when you get to C1, then you get the real definition, that's the general one.
Yeah, and that to me is where the unfortunate thing is. I can see what you're saying, because this is the same thing that happened with recycle. We're gonna pull a piece out of it and bring it down to a lower level, as opposed to here it is
like a separate call. When really
that's why I was saying
this is the call counter rotate. If you want to go look at the whole definition, go look here. But here's here's the part that we're gonna let you do.
See, for me, I would have just said, if you want to pull that out of recycle and teach that at mainstream, give it a new name.
Well, but then you'd have to also give it a new name in advanced, because the C1 version, all 8 recycle.
No, because you're adding an all 8 qualifier to it.
Right.
And that changes the definitions again.
Well, but the qualifier all 8 is not really supposed to change things like that. It's a kludge, because the original call recycle was, the all 8 version. And originally you just said you could, recycle was a call done from a quarter tag. And it wasn't until later that somebody said, oh, we could pull that wave thing would be kind of cool to do just by itself. only they could just stay together. Maybe we should, yeah, we'll do that. Oh, and I guess that means we can do the facing one too. That
Yeah, you could have called it wave recycle and or anything, but hey.
It might have been better to give the funny name to the other ones.
Yeah.
Like wave recycle and box recycle, and then just say all 8 or nothing recycle.
Mhm.
Yeah, the naming might have gone better that way, but
But it is what it is now. We're stuck with it.
Yeah, the fact that I don't know, it doesn't really bother me. It doesn't really bother me that they do that way, but it does freak people out when they get to advanced and they're like, what? This isn't recycle, this is something else.
Mhm.
So I mean, it does freak some people out, because they don't see any connection. Now on the other hand, if both of those definitions, the plus or the mainstream rather, and the I thought facing recycle was A2, not A1, but
it is A2.
Yeah. If those two definitions referenced the challenge definition, then that would also fix the problem in my mind. But then you have the people who say, oh, now you're requiring not alone dancers,
That's right.
but even
And
callers who don't call
that's
challenge.
why I'm saying, I don't know what happened there. We got a lot of echo coming back. I said, but that's what I'm saying, why it should be the other way around, that you reference down. You should never reference up.
Well,
and your qualifier should be clear, like right and left through, or like past the ocean, where it says at plus this, or at a higher level this, rather than referencing down, because it's wrong to have somebody have to learn higher levels in order to dance lower levels. It's wrong.
Well, the problem is that calls don't belong to a level. Recycle was originally a basic call. All 8 recycle, as we now call it,
argument
is a
with
basic call. That's right. And so it's not like, does that mean that it's too hard for people? Are we going to say that that's too hard for a basic caller to understand? I believe that the callers ought to know more than their, teachers in general ought to maybe. It's not unreasonable to expect them to know more of the material than, or more depth about something
actually,
than teaching
it
students,
is, because there are callers, and there's some really, really great callers that don't call above mainstream, and they don't know above mainstream. They don't want to know anything above mainstream, and yet they're phenomenal callers. You should not have to. You should not have to learn higher to do lower. It does work the other way around. You need to know lower to do higher. Now, with things
that's like saying that
with
it's
things
fine
like
if my 5th grade teacher only has a 5th grade education.
No, that's not. You've got an education to be an educator. You have to be an educator. You don't have to be a university professor to be an educator, is what I'm saying.
No, but you have to have a college degree to teach 5th grade. You can't just graduate 5th grade and then.
That's exactly, and that's what I'm saying about callers. You have to be able to teach, you have to be able to dance, you have to be able to teach, and have to be qualified to teach the level you're teaching. So you have to be a teacher. You don't have to be.
It's more than just being trained to be a teacher. A teacher who teaches 5th grade knows a lot more about. Knows a lot more arithmetic than a 5th grader.
That's exactly what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, to teach high school math, as an example, you don't need to have a degree in advanced theoretical physics and calculus.
No, but you better at least understand calculus.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. So if we look at that, in order to become a teacher, you need to have the basic understanding of calculus to teach elementary school.
Yeah.
Because that's a requirement. You don't need to know advanced theoretical physics to teach high school. You need to have the qualifications to do what is required to do that job. In order to do that job, you have to know the basic concepts with the rules and definitions and everything that apply to that math. And quite frankly, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 becomes calculus, and it becomes addition, and it becomes everything else when you start looking at it. So you have to understand the basic fundamentals.
Well, math and physics are actually the examples that are even more extreme than what I'm they're like really extreme examples of
Yeah.
the of the point that I'm making, because
Well, it's the same with English.
yeah, to teach those things at a low level, actually to teach those things requires understanding much higher level concepts.
Yeah. I like English as an example because I had a major in the military. He had a master's degree in English. He had a doctorate in English languages and literature. He could not write his way out of a paper bag. He could not spell, and he could not explain the rules of grammar.
Well, there's always people like that, but that's
and yet he had,
problem.
you know, that and you know, but when he needed to do something at that level, he was infinitely qualified and could do it. But he couldn't write a simple analysis report because he just couldn't formulate. He couldn't think down that level. And we have that with a lot of callers. And like you were saying, as an example with recycle or with all these others, yes, it was. Fan the top was on the basic list or on the mainstream list. Partner tag was on the mainstream. Cross trail through was on the basic list.
I think fan the top has actually moved around more than once. I've actually lost score. I'm not even sure what list it's on at the moment.
It's on plus.
It's back to plus, because it went back to mainstream for a while, I think.
Yeah, it was on mainstream in the 80s, and then it's gone back up to plus.
I thought it actually went back again and then may or may not have come back.
There was an argument about it, but it didn't quite happen that way. A lot of people didn't want to stop using it, so they just kept using it anyway.
Yeah.
And then finally they just gave up because the caller lad said, well, this is the way it is. It's up to you. You want to use it? Use it. Just make sure you workshop it. We don't care.
I lost score. I thought they'd actually put it back again.
Spin chain through went up, down, up, down.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But anyway, what I was saying was, when there's no problem with that, the definition is written. The definition fundamentally is not going to change on how the mechanics of the movement are done. But when it does shift on a list, that needs to be clarified so that fan the top doesn't get broken down into component pieces and put into a basic level dance. Centers cast off 3/4 and the ends circulate a quarter in your own floor. You know, and that's unfortunately what happens a lot when you get callers that don't have a foundation basis in basic mainstream, that come from higher levels and start calling down. They think anything that can happen at challenge or advanced 2 or whatnot, when they go to call a basic or mainstream dance, they have incredible trouble calling it because they're calling the complexity of the choreography of an A2 or a challenge floor using basic movements, which is what most of it is anyway. But the concepts are not applied the same way. The rules don't jive with what they're trying to do as to what the dancers, because there's variations to those rules that are subject or qualified as limit level or as program limitations.
Well, I don't see them. I don't see it really that way. What I see those guys doing is they just don't understand what's an appropriate level of difficulty.
Yeah.
And that's what you know, just how to apply the calls. You know, they're just ignorant about the.
There's a caller. What's his name? I haven't heard from him for a while. I used to go by the name of Oz, AAHZ. He called himself Oz Caller, and
No.
He was very, very vehement and very direct, very insulting to a lot of other callers. He had some really good material and some good ideas, but he was a my way. Well, I call challenge and I call this, and a while later we found out that he started calling it challenge because he danced challenge. That's all that was available. So he learned to dance from nothing to challenge because that's what was available. He's pulled through, learned that in about, I think, 6 weeks or something, and was dancing with the group. And eventually was asked to call because their caller passed or whatnot, and he was going to be the caller. And he's done that, and there's a lot of written material. But then in one session, I was having a long chat with Johnny Preston. Now, I don't know do you know Johnny?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So he was actually telling Johnny about how music should be structured and performance, and correcting him and telling him, well, that's not the way it should be done. That's not the way it's done for dancers. Dancers, you know, not knowing, of course, who Johnny Preston was telling Johnny how to teach new dancers, how to mentor callers, how to teach, and correcting him, telling him he's wrong when he wasn't at all.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like, I was going to actually have Johnny come and do a lot of the new dancer stuff and put things, he was going to do some things on singing calls and whatnot for me. And Oz just chased him right away. He just said, you know, I don't need to put up with this shit.
Well, I mean, the world's got plenty of assholes walking around.
Oh yeah.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is that it would be more reasonable if the definitions were structured by just saying, here's a big book of definitions. There's nothing really in here about levels. Here's just a bunch of calls. And then you have a list and you go down there and you look at it, says, it says plus recycle with restrictions number 573. And you go and you turn to page 573 and you read the definition for all 8 recycle.
You know the reality, there is a book like that. And that would actually just be say, here's Burleson's, and let's put a program, not a level, but a program index to it and keep it updated every year. But well, yeah, I can guarantee you,
if the Burleson definitions were actually correct, then yeah, that's more or less what I'm saying.
Yeah, but nobody would use it. Oh, well, I shouldn't say nobody would use it. Not many callers would use it, because that would take us back to, this is why we do have the program level of the program definitions. Here's the movements on this program.
But the definitions don't change.
I know.
That recycle is the same call all the way through. It's I
agree. There's a program qualifier.
Because we hid it from them.
Yep, there's a program qualifier. And very few callers go and understand the basic origins or the structure of these things or the evolution of these calls, the evolution of, quite frankly, a lot of them don't even understand the evolution of how we got the programs that we have. You talk quarterly selections nowadays to people like Yolanda, other than in reference what they've learned in these meetings, they've never heard of that.
Yeah, there was a thing after quarterly selections too. What was it? Something quarterly emphasis calls.
Yes.
Like Crossfire.
But, you know, and that was basically, well, the quarterlies are a bit, because the quarterly selection became the thing. And then it became, well, the quarterly selections, which really pissed me off at mainstream, became, let's pull a plus movement down on the program. Well, that's basically, let's rush to plus, you know, and
yeah.
And that should have never happened. Unfortunately,
but the quarterly selection was never anything anybody was. Most callers that I know and most clubs, they never do the quarterly selections.
See, that's why I said I was spoiled when I came out, when I started dancing in Europe. The quarterly selection was taught. Every club caller would teach the quarterly selections. When you went to a convention, you could expect to have a quick walkthrough in a workshop of what the quarterly selection is for that quarter, if it was at that dance, if it was being called.
Well, if they teach it at the dance, that's fine, but they...
No, like when the quarterly selection would come out, every caller in Germany got a copy of the quarterly selection from Call It. It was distributed amongst the European callers teachers. Now, you got this in the mail. What was the new quarterly selection? This is for this month. Here was the definition here. And the callers workshops locally, they would teach it, and then it would get taught in the clubs. And then when you go to the big jamboree, like you could expect to dance it at your club. If you had dancers come to visit, it would be workshop. It would be part of there's the quick walkthrough. And when you got to the convention, you'd have the walkthrough, but you'd be doing that quarterly selection as well as part of the dance.
Well, the quarterly selection was always supposed to be, if you're out of stuff to do and you want to do something wacky, do but this instead. So at least we're all doing the same.
It was a completely different mentality. And like I said, the definitions were the definitions. It wasn't common styling or this is the way they do it in the States or whatnot. It was, here's the book written, here's the definitions written, here's what it is, this is what you can do. Now you've got to write your own choreography. You've got to do this within the rules, within the guidelines, within the definitions. Here's some structured material to learn from, but you're expected to know, to teach, to do this, that your dancers can dance this. And if it says mainstream, your dancers have to be able to dance the mainstream program from all of the standard applications and a good smattering of the extended applications. That's just the expected bit for the dancers. And that's your average level, easy level dancer. And that's what it was, because what they had was the definitions. This is what it meant. Recycle didn't have boys or girls. It had ends and centers, you know, and that's what you learned was ends and centers. And that's what you danced was ends and centers. And you were expected to dance that. You were very formational aware. The same was in Russia. The same was in Japan, because what they had was, here's the book. It couldn't be explained. It had to be translated. Then it had to be English translated and then corrected fundamentally, so it would go back and forth. So when you explain that in Japanese, and they're very specific on definitions and meaning, that's what you learn. That's what you dance. That was why the dancing level was here compared to what was going on. Now it's slowly balancing out. And even in Europe, they get the same thing now, is they're going the way of the States. It's becoming toned down from what it was. Czechoslovakia is very different than Germany now, is very different than England now. And they're facing the same thing. It's like somebody made the comment in a movie I watched. Have you ever seen the movie The Kingsman?
No.
Okay, it was something in there, but it reminded me of a saying that somebody said. It says, "Oh, How I Met Your Mother." Have you ever seen that TV series?
No, I don't watch too much TV.
Okay, there was an incident. There was a girl, they thought she was a porn star, but she was actually a teenage pop star in Canada, which was even more shameful than being a pornography star, right? And they asked her, says, "Well, this is the 90s. Why do you look like this is the early 80s?" And it says, "Well, Canada didn't get the 80s until 1993."
Right.
It's that kind of thing. Well, Germany didn't get square dancing, US square dancing, until 10, 15 years after it happened in the US type thing.
I saw a funny commercial yesterday. I think it was that the person was in their bathroom getting ready to go out, and the sink and the toilet and the mirror and things were giving them a hard time critiquing them. It was, I don't know, I don't even remember what the commercial was for, but the idea was you're under too much pressure, and you go in the bathroom and finish getting dressed, and even the walls and things are talking to you, giving you a hard time, putting you under pressure. But one of the but anyway, it's a guy puts on a sweater and wraps the arms around in front of him, puts a sweater on the back, and then like a cape, and is tying it up, and the toothbrush holder or something says to him, "Where are you going on this date? 1983."
Fair enough. But anyway, that's just the way it is. I hope that people do take this session, or even the more formalized one that we've done before, and they do take it to some of these schools, or at least to some of the workshops, and get it out. It's one of the things I like about our Behind the Mic magazine is there's a few callers organizations that have written to us and says, we structure our callers meetings around the release of this month. You guys got to be more consistent on it, because we try and hold our meetings at the same time, but every now and then you don't put an edition out that month, that we're looking for things to do.
I belong to two callers associations. Well, three really, but one of them is a for the whole state. The state is very big. The association doesn't actually do anything, and we only meet once a year for about 30 minutes. So I'm not going to count that one. That one exists to help us organize a big state convention that we have.
Big events, yeah.
But that's really all it does. But the other associations are more like what I think of as a regular association, where it's regional, and some people come, some people might drive hour and a half or something to get there, which is, for here, that's a long way. But but it's a regional thing. And there's one that's the Washington, D.C. area association, and that pulls in people from Washington and Maryland and Virginia.
And surrounds, yeah.
Maybe a little Delaware and whatever sometimes, but that's the D.C. one. And I also belong to one of the associations up in New England. Funnily enough, the New England, there's several associations up there. The one that I'm a member of lately is OCCA.
Oh yeah.
Not to be confused
the other one.
Yes. Well, we refer to the California one as the other one. We're the real one. But anyway, I've tried to get the callers from both of those associations interested in coming to any of these things, any of the Saturday ones. And I just can't get them to come. They're just can't be bothered. It's really weird. I mean, we have our monthly meeting, which every other month is an educational meeting, which is essentially what these are. But I talk them up and I tell them, and they're like, well, we went to some of those GSI ones. It's not like the GSI one. It's not a lecture. It's like a caller's education meeting. Come on, you'll love it. And they just, for the love of God, I just can't get them to go. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, it is one of the things that does happen. You just reminded me, I forgot to put the reminder on Facebook about the session coming up. So I've got to do that yet this morning. I'll probably do it right while we're talking.
Yeah, no, I love these meetings. They're just like our Callers Association meetings, only bigger, and you get international input, and they're just great.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that some people do find them of benefit, and they find the information that's put in there useful. That's the main thing.
I love these things. I mean, I could give most of the talks that are given at them, as could a number of people who attend them. But we all show up. There's always something to learn in the